meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. All committee members are present except for Mr. Hazen at this point in time. We're going to start off with committee business. I have a note here. Mr. Murkowski, do you have an update for us today?
I just thought I'd set a little bit of context. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have our Public Safety Day, so you'll hear from the district attorney, the sheriff, parole and probation, youth services, and behavioral health. To Commissioner Trieger's question yesterday, is youth services included in our public safety sort of system graphic? Well, today hopefully is the representation of that, that you have all of those entities presenting. We try to do this in the last few years. We've done this where we bring all of them, so you have this kind of theme, right? And you see the overlap from all of the public safety entities within Lane County. So excited about that. I also, since it's our first committee meeting, I wanted to just call out that something new in the proposed budget document that you have in front of you is performance measures. What we're calling performance measures, I actually would argue they're probably more like performance indicators. This is, we've typically included performance measures or indicators in the adopted budget, but have not in recent years included them in the proposed. So we have now done that. I think that's a good change. I will also just offer a deep appreciation and gratitude to our department staff who worked really hard. It's a lot of work to pull together, to identify the right indicators, to collect that information, and to compile all of it. So appreciation to all of our departments for doing that good work. And then also just to say, you know, likely there will be questions about those performance measurements and indicators, and we look forward to having that. Certainly a process that we can refine and improve as we go forward. But I look at it, yesterday I gave some examples of, I talked a lot about workforce culture, and I tried to draw this line between investments that we've been making in recruitment, retention, development of employees, and investment in emerging leaders, and in development of our talent. That line drawn through to employee satisfaction, right? We're engaging employees and providing opportunity, and we're seeing employee satisfaction going up. And then that line drawn further to turnover rates, that we're seeing, you know, our turnover rate. Now, is that a straight line? No. I mean, does one result in the other result? Not necessarily, but they're good indicators. Those data points are good indicators that these investments that we're making in a healthy workplace, we believe there are some indicators via satisfaction of our employees and turnover rates and other things, that it's a good indicator on some level that those investments that we're making are having an impact. So that's, I guess, how I would like to see us view performance measurement in the organization. I'm not as big of a fan personally. In my 20 plus years in county government in different places, I've seen a lot of different efforts around really aggressive measurement of every single action that's done in an organization. I've seen a lot of time, effort, and resource go into that, and not necessarily the results yielded. In a really dynamic organization like ours is, right, where things are ever changing and fluid, and we have to be sort of resilient and flexible and nimble in our response to things. If we are too aggressive in measuring every single thing that we do, unlike maybe a manufacturing environment or a technology environment where processes are very repeatable, and it's important to sort of track those and continuous improvement and measure and change and adjust on the fly. We can do elements of that here, but it's just want to, you know, create some distinction between how local government service organization operates versus some others. So that's my setup to that. Look forward to our conversations about measurements and indicators, and excited again to hear from our public safety partners today. So I'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Ms. Moody, is there anything else from the Budget Committee staff?
We do not have anything else today. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Burney.
I need to just let you know, I need to excuse myself from 3 o'clock to 3:45. I meet as chair with the chairs of 2 other counties and the governor's office, and given the announcement yesterday, I think it's important I'd be there, but I'll return and thank you for your indulgence.
Excellent, thank you. And for the minutes, note that Mr. Hazen is now on the call as well. And does anybody else from the committee have any other comments or questions before we move forward to our next item on the agenda? Okay. See,
I think these meetings are recorded, so I think I missed some conversation there just now. So just if I could get the links to where the recording is, I'm not sure where those are normally found. Appreciate it.
excellent. Okay, so I think we're ready. DA Perlow, the floor is yours.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Patty Perlow. For those of you I haven't met who are new to the committee, I'm the elected district attorney for Lane County. I have just started my second elected term in January after having been appointed in August of 2015. I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining for those of you who are new what it is we do and why. But I'll try to keep within my time limit and give you plenty of opportunity for questions. And Jill is going to drive the presentation. Jill, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the DA's office is made up of 4 basic functions: criminal prosecution, including a prosecutor out at juvenile to cover delinquency matters, our family law division, which handles child support enforcement, and then the support services division is made up of support staff, including victim services and our medical legal death investigators. Let me go on, please. Here's the information about where our money comes from that isn't general fund money. We get grants that cover victim services, our domestic violence investigator, our DUI crash fatality investigator. We have a small grant that covers, grants that cover our treatment court, prosecutor, and then victim services. Next slide. All right, so our expenditures are obviously mostly personnel, and that's the bulk of it, but other expenditures that we have for materials and services include expenditures that we normally wouldn't expect to have. Death investigations, being in the DA's office, is not something that happens in every county. And so we have to pay for the cost of the morgue and transporting bodies to the morgue. We pay Peace Health to have that space rent, and then they charge us for the use of their equipment. And then we staff the morgue, other than the forensic pathologist, and provide all the supplies. Listed below are some of the things that we can't really identify ahead of time what the costs are going to be. Last year, we didn't have very many trials, and so most of those costs weren't attributed to our budget. But as we're looking forward to opening back up and taking more cases into trial, we'll expect all of those costs to rebound and probably be more than in previous years because we have such a huge backlog of cases. Next slide, please. I'm going to just briefly touch on the COVID-19 pandemic impacts. We had to make some changes structurally within our office so that we could have distance between staff. If you haven't been in the courthouse or in the DA's office, it is a very small, cramped, terrible space. And so to be able to continue our function, it required making some plexiglass in between the workstations and all. Our death investigations team had to prepare for what could happen, and we also assumed responsibility for a greater taking jurisdiction of cases because of that. Our investigators are exempt, and so they just continue to work until everything is done. I'll get to that in just a moment. Our volunteers weren't allowed to come into the office to run our restraining order clinic. It's not a mandated function, it's a service we provide to the court. And so we had, a reduction of services to people who were looking for protective orders, but all of the services that we were required to perform, we continued to do. We tried early on in the pandemic to have A/B shifts for the staff, but everything got so far behind that didn't work. And so we had to bring everybody back into the facility a lot sooner than the rest of the county has been doing. Next slide, please. Jill? Well, anyway, the next slide is about the Holiday Farm fire, and the only impact to my staff was, again, the death investigations team had to be up and running and prepared because they were predicting that there were going to be a huge number of fatalities out of that terrible fire. Fortunately, there was only one, and the state took jurisdiction of it, but it required a lot of time. Our investigators, a couple of them were up working in support of the sheriff's office, and some of my staff went into the EOC to help. But for the most part, our impact from the Holiday Farm fire was thankfully a lot less than many of the other departments and the people who live up in that area. Next slide, please. All right, now we're getting to the meat of the department. The criminal division is where criminal prosecution takes place. It's important to know that we don't initiate any investigations. Everything that comes to this office for prosecution comes from one of the 11 law enforcement agencies within Lane County. We received in 2020 5,828 referrals from law enforcement. There are 24 lawyers in the criminal division who reviewed that. Well, we're budgeted for 24 lawyers. We only have 23 now. I have one on standby. He's hired if he can find housing to move here. So then I will be fully staffed. So 24 lawyers to review almost 6,000 cases. In some years, we have about 7,000 referrals that come into this office. The teams are divided into a major crimes team, a domestic violence team, and then 2 general teams. We used to have a supervisor of the misdemeanor division. Because so many of the lawyers in this office are so green, we have senior prosecutors supervising the misdemeanor lawyers as well as the felony teams. And so the burden on those team leaders is significant. We have 1 lawyer assigned to juvenile to handle all the delinquency matters. And we have 1 prosecutor assigned to all of our treatment courts. There are 4 treatment courts. There's a drug treatment court, veterans court, or I'm sorry, 3, mental health court. I want a DUI court, but so far that hasn't come to fruition. We have 3 investigators in the office and 1 over at family law. The 3 who are here, 2 of them are grant funded, and that would be the domestic violence investigator, required to spend 80% of his time conducting domestic violence work. We contract with the sheriff's office for one of the sheriff's investigators for that position currently. The DUI investigator was grant funded from an ODOT pass-through grant. It's a federal grant that came through ODOT to us. And now we have spent down the grant money, and so that position to continue is reverted to general fund by well, I think we still have about $50,000 of grant money that to last to the end of September. They're on the federal fiscal year. So they do the follow-up work when there isn't an investigator or a detective assigned from a police agency. They serve subpoenas. They go out and arrest people on warrants. I have 6 attorneys on pager constantly to advise the police there's a major crimes homicide pager, a crash pager for highway fatalities, a police legal advisor, and a DUI blood draw. And then the 6th pager is for sexual assaults on campus. Outside of criminal prosecution, we have to do a lot of other things. It includes public records appeals. If the city of Eugene denies public records to someone, the appeal comes to my office. People who want their arrests or convictions set aside have to come through my office. Motions regarding release from sex offender registration and requirements regarding driver's license reinstatement all come through this office without additional resource. We were doing the civil commitments. I have to give a huge shout out to County Council and thank you, Steve Mokreisky, for allowing the movement of civil commitments from the DA's office. The amount of time that was going into that was just unworkable for us without additional resources. In July of 2019, we were required to start recording grand jury. At the time, we were assured that there would be no cost to the counties for that function, and of course, that did not turn out to be true. The state has offered to pay for the costs of transcription using a state-provided contractor for that purpose, but the attorneys are required to review all of the transcripts. A paralegal is setting that up for discovery. A grand juror runs the equipment. They did actually buy the initial equipment for us and drop it by. So that was a big thank you. I'll answer questions about the criminal division and prosecution later. I'm going to move on now to the next slide. Family law is tasked with collecting child support and enforcing support orders for medical care for Lane County children. And so each year there are 4 lawyers and support staff in leased space across the street, which is actually very nice office space, particularly when compared to the courthouse, that they collect about $21 million a year, between $20 and $21 million a year for Lane County kids, so to support them. They are federally grant funded for 2/3 of the cost. So the investment from Lane County is for 1/3 of the cost of that program. And 66% of the costs are provided to us by the federal government, including the leased office space. So the return on investment from the county is great for Lane County kids. And we also receive some incentives. It's out of a collective of every office in the country that does child support enforcement. And so based upon your performance, you receive some incentives for incentive dollars. And Lane County has always been a high recipient of those dollars. And the only way that amount of money goes down is if somebody else's performance improves. Next slide, please. The Support Services Division, I mentioned before, has victim services. Victims in Oregon have constitutional rights, and it is the responsibility of the district attorney to enforce those constitutional and statutory rights. And so Victim Services does outreach to every victim of crime when we receive a police report. They also do outreach or provide service in cases where we get a call from somebody while the case is under review. They provide restraining order clinic or protective order clinic. They document restitution for victims of crime to get compensation for their loss from the offender. They help get money from crime victims compensation at the state level. They help somebody through the process of being a victim of crime, sitting with them at trial and in court hearings and explaining to them what the process is, because being a victim of a crime is very traumatic, and having somebody assist you through that, through the criminal justice system is very helpful. The Death Investigations Unit takes jurisdiction of between 1,000 and 1,200, and it's been closer to 1,200 the last few years, unexplained or unattended deaths in Lane County. And when they take jurisdiction, that means that they prepare a report. It doesn't mean there's an autopsy in every case. Taking jurisdiction could be drawing toxicology to find out what the cause and manner of death is. They do contacts with medical providers, do contacts with family, and well, we don't provide the body transport, we pay for it. Because of budget limitations, there are 3 FTE who cover full-time death investigations. And we are very fortunate there are EMTs and nurses in the community who are willing to serve on call so that we can cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 3 FTE, you would not be able to sustain that. And then the clerical staff, finally, is the 4th branch of support services. And of course, nothing would happen without the clerical staff to enter the data on our intakes, to run criminal history worksheets, to provide discovery to defendants, to manage our dockets. And so that 4th prong is what keeps us up and running. Next slide, please. Highlights of 2021. You can see for yourself the $21 million in child support, the services provided to crime victims, the referrals to the criminal division from Lane County law enforcement, the investigation of deaths, petitioners assisted with protective orders. During COVID, we, again, did not have the volunteers in the office. And so the director of victim services personally made sure that every person seeking a protective order could get the information that they needed without having direct physical contact with those people. Veterans Court graduations, again, our numbers for 2020 were so low Veterans Court was all virtual, treatment court was virtual, mental health court was virtual, and they're still conducting those court proceedings online instead of in person, which of course is not great for helping people get the services they need, the treatment they need, and the support they need. But the one flip side good thing that has come from that is that we've learned that we can serve people outside the valley virtually. While it's not best practice, to date, people who live in Florence, Oak Ridge, McKenzie Bridge have not been able to take advantage of our treatment courts because it required them coming into court regularly and come into the treatment services facility. And so, while we've had this negative, I think something good is going to come out of it so that we can provide services to more people. Next slide, please. Future challenges and opportunities. Our budget is status quo. We are not seeking any changes in services or FTE at this time, although at some point I am going to need a chief deputy. For those of you who don't know, several years ago, our major crimes team needed another lawyer. My chief deputy was still handling cases and trying to be chief deputy. It just wasn't sustainable. And so we created a 5th position on the major crimes team to deal with the level of crimes that we were seeing. And each of the cases that are coming in, not just on the major crimes team, but for all of the lawyers here, are more complex, have much more media, video and all. And so I gave up the chief deputy position. So now I'm doing both of those jobs, and it is probably not to everyone's advantage to have me doing that. And so for succession planning and for the benefit of, a better run, more efficient office, we're going to need a chief deputy at some point. And investments, the one-time investments, the court should be providing the technology that we need when a trial is conducted. Over in the federal building, beautiful media, screen drops down, they have everything. We take TVs on carts into the courtrooms to present video to jurors. And so, and right now, we have to go buy another TV and cart. So it is and we need to invest in updated technology for trial and for grand jury. Actually, our grand jury room, we just had remodeled last year, and it's even though it's a function of the court, the county paid for the remodel to the facility and a new smart board in there. It's terrific, but we're still taking TVs on carts into courtrooms, and we have this thing called an Elmo for presenting other media. So we need to spend a little bit of money to upgrade. And next slide, please. How Lane County District Attorney's Office fits into the strategic plan. Well, obviously, a safe and healthy county is our prime function, holding people who commit crimes accountable, using our DUI crash fatality investigator to his fullest capacity, because Lane County has a terrible traffic fatality rate. We have a very low law enforcement presence on our highways, and I'm sure you've seen people speeding with reckless abandon and oftentimes creating or getting into crashes, and even if it doesn't lead to death, lead to serious injury. I'm working, as I mentioned before, to initiate a DUI court, because those treatment courts are our best resource for getting people engaged and away from the conduct that causes them to be criminals. And people who have alcohol problems don't have to drive. And we need to keep them engaged and recognize the cost to the community. That's actually one of the most dangerous things a person can do in our community, is drink and drive. It is worse in many ways than someone with a weapon. Well, a car is a weapon, particularly under those circumstances. We watch out for disease trends, and COVID was an excellent example of that, and overdose deaths in the community, particularly now that drugs are decriminalized. And then enforcing child support and medical care. Vibrant communities. We want to make sure that every victim of crime has access to culturally appropriate services. And then we participate in the programs that empower people to get out of the criminal justice system, particularly our treatment courts. The infrastructure, I want to just give up on this building, but yes, we do try to take care of our aging and inadequate facility. And I know there is work being done to improve the security of the parking facility where the commissioners park, the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office is the only law enforcement agency of which I am aware anywhere that doesn't have secure parking for their vehicles. Enough of that. And our people and partnerships, we couldn't do anything that we do without the people and partnerships that we have. The DA's office and the criminal justice system is just one part of public safety. Public safety is made up of law enforcement, public health, community members, and so everybody has to work together in order to achieve a safe and vibrant community. Next slide, please. Measuring performance. We were asked to identify measurements for performance. The collection of child support is one that is easily measurable. Our efforts to support 100% of victims of crime who come through is an easy and measurable function. This last one is a little bit more difficult. We are going to make an effort to have our treatment courts at capacity. Now, all we can do is make the offer to the defendant through their attorney to get them to participate in these programs. But our goal is to make sufficient offers during the course of this fiscal year to have our courts at capacity. Can't help it if people turn it down, but I can measure that we are making the effort to get them at capacity. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end. Questions?
Great. Thank you, DA Perlow. By a show of hands, questions for the DA, please? Yes, Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, DA Perlow. I have two questions. One, just a definition question. Can you share what a DUI court would look like or do that's different from the drug court? Why that's a special separate court that's needed?
Because the conduct is focused more on community safety than just the individual's treatment needs. While the treatment needs are addressed, the impact is greater. It's not as individualized to the person and the family and the people that an individual that with treatment needs touches.
Okay, great, thank you. The other question is, we've received quite a bit of community input and testimony about collection of data, race and ethnicity data about folks in the criminal justice system broadly, but specifically through your office. And I know this is something you've talked about in the past and participated in some program at City Club back in the before times. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the barriers, whether it's resources you need or structural systemic barriers that you face to collecting that data, reporting on that data, what kind of resources you would need to do that, and whether there's opportunity to produce meaningful data in that regard from your office, how it might be used to inform the services that you provide.
That's a great question. So without much effort at all, we could provide here are the demographics of the people who were prosecuted by this office. What the requesters were asking is for me to collect data from all of the law enforcement agencies. The Criminal Justice Commission already does that. I don't have authority to demand data from these other agencies, and most of the municipal police agencies, their citations and arrests don't come to this office unless it's a felony. And so the Criminal Justice Commission already has that data. Now, as to who we're prosecuting, I can provide that data. I can't provide without additional resources what the dispositions of the cases that we have. Our software just is inadequate for producing these kind of reports. But the Criminal Justice Commission collects that data already. I can tell you the race or ethnicity by the numbers on the cases that are referred to this office with Becca Messenger as our accounting analyst, spending a great deal of time to drill that down out of what we can get from our database. And then that same information can come forward on who charges were filed against. And I asked her to do that yesterday, and she spent an inordinate amount of time doing that. And what it told us is, as is consistent with all of the cases that are referred here, we don't file on 25 to 30% of them. And it just is coincidence, not through any plan or program that I have, that in the 3 areas I asked her to run stats, which was cases assigned to the major crimes team, property crimes, and domestic violence, that about a third to a half of the cases that came in weren't filed on people of color. But that wasn't because of anything we had planned. It was because no case is filed if it doesn't have sufficient admissible evidence. And so what it turned out from running the numbers of what we did file, I can provide that data, but what I can't do is anything in response to it. I cannot ethically choose who I'm going to prosecute based upon this data. And so my view of this is, while the Criminal Justice Commission is already collecting all of this data, their link to the dashboards is on my website, and I am happy to ask the county to provide resources to have that data from the Criminal Justice Commission available on my website. but I can't do anything in response to that data. I can't change who's getting prosecuted based upon what their race or ethnicity is. I have to file cases only based upon sufficient admissible evidence. And so, and in fact, the complaints that come to this office are for the cases we don't file, not for the cases that we do file for the most part. So we have a number of people in the community who are disappointed in, 25 to 30% of the cases that can't be filed. But if the data weren't available from the Criminal Justice Commission, I would need a full-time data analyst to be able to draw out of our database that we have purchased. The second alternative is to buy a new database and have a part-time analyst gather that information. But with the resources I have, I can't provide that same information at the same level of detail that the Criminal Justice Commission does provide.
Great, thank you. One quick follow-up. Can you explain that 25 to 30% no file number, what the reasons are for not filing?
So if there isn't sufficient evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, we have an ethical obligation not to proceed on that case. Or if there was a bad stop or a bad search, or if there is some barrier to being able to meet that burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, it is our ethical obligation to err on the side of not filing charges. Charging someone with a crime is a really, just the charge alone of a crime has an impact on a person. And to do that without sufficient evidence, of course, would be an unethical move.
Great, thank you. I just want to clarify, it's not because of a lack of resources or a fiscal resource challenge in your department.
Well, if we did file 100% of the cases, it would be a fiscal resource challenge for 24 people to cover between 5,000 and 7,000 cases a year.
Right, but the no files, you're not filing because of staffing capacity or other resource challenges.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And my first question is, how can you keep your presentation, DA Pro, to within 25 minutes? That's a wonderfully tiny amount of time that you were given for this, and I apologize for that. With the breadth of work that your office does, I wish we had far more time. So I have several questions that I will not ask. First one is, how many police forces did you mention that feed your office with cases? How many in Lane County?
There are 11 in Lane County. 10 of them produce cases that come to this office. The tribal police, it's rare that we see their cases, but occasionally.
Thank you. And the work that you do, nobody else can do. I mean, you're the only, you and your staff are the only ones that do this work.
That is correct. It was originally a constitutionally created position. It's statutorily mandated that we conduct this function. It used to be supported financially by the state as well.
Thanks. And then the other thing I wanted to clarify is that you say that you have no control as to who they arrest and who they bring. You can't tell them who not to bring. Is that an accurate statement? Is that basically what you said?
That is correct. We do not initiate any investigations. We are responsive to everything that comes in. And truth be told, law enforcement is mostly responsive. The only proactive work that I've seen recently that's coming into this office is with regard to the child internet sex stuff, where they do pretend to be a 13-year-old girl online. And traffic stops when somebody's impaired and driving.
Thank you, DA Perlo. And then just the final thing is that, you mentioned that you have ethical obligations to perform your duties in certain fashions, certain manners. There are ethics that are involved and you have an obligation to do that. My comment there is that I hope and expect that nobody I hope and I expect that nobody is questioning your ethics and performance of your duty. Thank you, DA Perlow.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vucinic, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. You said you have a basically the same budget as last year, that you're kind of holding your budget over with no real changes. How's that going to work with EPD staffing up, 4 new FTE and LCSO in the police division? So all those officers are going to be generating cases. And at the same time, you also have the cases coming back for non-unanimous juries from the Ramos decision. Are you going to be able to handle that with the same amount of FTE, or are we kidding ourselves that we're not going to have to start doing do not files based on staff availability versus the evidence?
Well, we also have the 2,500 cases that are backed up since 2019 because of COVID. And so, no, I can say that right now we are at a status quo for staffing, but I can't promise that I'm not going to come back to you and say how, when the floodgates open. I don't know how much work the EPD officers will be bringing us at this point. We'll have to wait to see if it's mostly, public order offenses, misdemeanors, violations. Those will be going to municipal court. If they staff up their investigations unit greater, then we will be seeing more felony cases.
Thank you.
At the sheriff's office, 4 more people is terrific, but I don't see that having a tremendous impact, because 4 people covering a county this size are still not going to be able to if the sheriff's office were adequately staffed, then we would be in trouble here.
Thank you. Mr. Hazen, you had a question?
Yes, brief comment and then a question. First, I just want to commend your commitment to prosecuting DUI cases. I've served as a juror in one of those cases, and I was very disappointed to see the accused get off. And I wondered to myself if more resources might have enabled that person to be properly, anyway, technicalities can often get in the way of these cases, I know. So commend your commitment in that area. Following up on Commissioner Trieger's comment about community concern of racism in the justice system. The citizens I've spoken to are concerned very simply about their tax dollars being used to support a system that accepts or perpetuates racial bias. This is not an easy question. I think we all recognize that. We all recognize that training on things like implicit bias is just the beginning. I'm sure you're aware the county board has made a commitment or issued a statement on this, declaring racism as a public health issue. Understanding the limitations of your role, what role do you feel your department has in supporting the commitment of this commission to eradicating racism in all forms?
Our obligation is to look at a case strictly on whether or not there's sufficient evidence to prove it, without bias or anything else coming into the notion. We try to pick jurors who are unbiased, but of course that is not always apparent when you're doing your jury questioning. We hope that the judges are all unbiased as they hear cases and make their determinations. But my role always will be to put community safety first and to prosecute those cases that the community expects us to hold people accountable for committing crimes. I can tell you that investing resources before people get to the community, to the criminal justice system, is the most important thing we can do to prevent a racial bias in the criminal justice system or in any other system. We need to invest in early childhood education. We need to invest in housing. We need to invest in education and support to children and families up to adulthood. But even at that level, if we could magically come up with all of the resources to protect our community, we can't stop people from coming into our community and committing crime. And so we've had a number of cases that are gang-related cases that are violent crimes with firearms that are people coming here from outside, and there is nothing we can do as a community to stop that, unless we hold people accountable for coming into our community and committing crime.
Chairman, if I could, Ms. Pearl, I understand that this is a complex issue. There are probably a lot of departments that have a role to play. If I was to play back, just to paraphrase what you said, I think I understood that your role is to be unbiased in this process. There isn't anything new or different that you see as happening this year compared to last year, years before, because of citizen concern in this area. Did I understand that correctly? It's just continue doing the great work you've been doing. Is that correct?
So we can be aware, okay, and we can reflect internally to make sure that our decision-making process is unbiased, but it doesn't change our ethical obligations or our responsibility to the community. I can't pick and choose what kinds of cases we're going to prosecute based upon national news media or people's perceptions of law enforcement and the criminal justice system from around the county or the country. I can only endeavor to do the best work that I can do and support people in my office to do the exact same thing.
Thank you.
Any other budget related questions for DA Pearl? Thank you, Patty.
Thank you. My apologies to the sheriff for going over.
Okay, let's see. Sheriff Harold, are you online? There he is.
Yeah. You ready for me to dive in? All right. Thank you, Chair Logan, and good afternoon, Budget Committee members, and welcome to those who are new from last year. Frankly, it feels like we've lived a whole lifetime since last year when we presented last. In addition to our regular heavy workload this year, we've made constant adjustments to continue to operate during a pandemic in all aspects of our office, particularly with respect to the Lane County Jail. We've prepared and responded to civil unrest, which turned to riot on a number of occasions, working to ensure protection of both the courthouse and the Lane County Jail. On several occasions, we experienced property damage at the jail, particularly the worst event, pulling down our secure perimeter fencing and breaking windshields out of some of our vehicles. So that required a staff plan and response. Obviously, we had the initial and ongoing response to the Holiday Farm Fire video, or to the Holiday Farm Fire. I did want to point out, if you haven't gotten to see it, we prepared a video about our response to the Holiday Farm Fire, and that's available on our website. I'd love it if you wanted to go take a look sometime when you have time, if you haven't seen it. We had, multiple significant calls through the year, but particularly the Butler Road call where an individual fired over 100 rounds at our deputy sheriffs. And there's a video about that event as well, also available on our webpage. In addition to these things, I've spent quite a bit of time making effort to do community outreach to the Mohawk Valley area regarding a proposed law enforcement district that those folks will be voting on here within the next couple of weeks. Internally, we conducted a career development process within our organization. The Sheriff's Office has used a career development program for over 15 years. We use it to prioritize our limited training dollars, as well as our limited time available to mentor other individuals within our organization to prepare them for future promotional opportunities. Candidates that put in for the career development program go through a robust application and screening process, which we completed last fall. And to that end, today, you're going to hear from two of the successful applicants. We have Acting Lieutenant Jason Moore will help present from the Corrections Division, And we have Acting Lieutenant Rich Flessner, who will help present today for the Police Services Division. And along with them, you'll hear the sirens in my background. You'll hear from Lieutenant Greg Rice and Lieutenant DJ Mann to present today. Both Captain Clint Riley and Captain Chris Doyle are going to be available, but not presenting. We're using this as an opportunity for our lieutenants. And to that end, I'm going to turn this over now to Chief Deputy Carl Wilkerson, and then I'll check in with you at the end.
And
I'm not hearing any audio on my end.
nor am I. And at this moment, since I'm not chair, I'm going to excuse myself for the chair's meeting with the governor's office. I'll be right back. Absolutely zero disrespect. I want to hear all of this. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Bray. Okay, we're still not getting audio.
It does look like he's muted, though. I wonder if there's a system. Is the organizer of the event on? Do they have control over his audio? Because from what I can see, he's not muted. I don't think he's self-muted.
Correct.
We also do not show him muted on our end.
I think we've got a technical difficulty there.
Always log off and then log back in.
Looks like we're going to change rooms here.
Okay, commissioners and budget committee members, can you hear me now?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
On your promotion to sheriff, there you are.
I like my office better, actually, but we'll get going. My name is Carl Wilkerson. I'm the Chief Deputy at the Sheriff's Office, where I'm honored to serve. I am going to go forward now that you can hear me. The Sheriff's Office mission is to conserve the peace. Sheriff's values is we're committed to justice and integrity, and we're honored to serve. There are 4 divisions within the Sheriff's Office, and we're going to go over all 4 of those. And next slide, please. The Sheriff's Office has a variety of resources that fund it, to include general fund, the public safety levy. We have several police contracts to include the City of Crestwell, City of Veneta, Oregon State Parks, Marine Board, Bureau of Land Management. We also have several contracts with our dispatch center, to include the Oak Ridge Police and Fire Department, LCC, Parole and Probation, and Coburg PD. The jail has a contract with the City of Eugene to provide municipal beds. We have other funding sources to include the Community Corrections Act, GRI, and grants that we apply for. One of the changes in our budget this year is we discontinued our contract with the Bureau of Prisons, which will ultimately result in a reduction and a closure of our RRC, or our Residential Reentry Center. Next slide, please. This is just a pie graph to kind of show you the breakdown of the Sheriff's Office overall budget. You'll see that probably our 2 biggest chunks of that budget is our general fund dollars and our public safety levy to operate corrections. Next slide, please. Some of the big things and changes in our budget this year will include a 6 FTE reduction due to the RRC closure, resulting from the Federal Bureau of Corrections contract ending. We have a significant increase to our fleet costs this year due to a change in billing method, hoping to have a little bit more transparency in how our budget process occurs. And one other additional change that has occurred this year is due to some regulatory changes and by the state. For certification for our corrections officers, they will have the same annual training requirements for number of hours of training as our police. So that will increase the amount of training that all of our sworn staff will have to have. Next slide, please. This is just another graph to kind of show you the makeup of how the different divisions are funded. For the purposes of this slide, the Office of the Sheriff's Division is incorporated in the Operations Support Division. But you can see that all three divisions use a large chunk of general fund, and that the Corrections Division is primarily supported by the Public Safety Levy. Next slide, please. Sheriff's Office has been impacted over the last year because of the COVID pandemic. There have been almost daily changes in policy and procedure and how we combat this pandemic. We've had a loss of revenue from things like our civil processing, fingerprinting, and then the RRC impact actually is partially due to the COVID pandemic because the beds were not being filled, and therefore we weren't getting paid by the Bureau of Prisons, which resulted in ultimately the closure of that contract. Some other expenses that occurred is that the county authorized TM cells that were not planned for in our budget. The Sheriff's Office was not really able to do any of its positions through telework or remote work. Therefore, when people had exposures to COVID or when they were off because of COVID reasons, that created overtime to backfill those positions. There's been significant changes, operationally speaking, in both our Corrections Division and our Operations Support Division that we'll get into as we get into those divisions. There has been a significant change in the number of beds so that we can maintain a safe environment for both our adults in custody and our staff. However, even with these changes, because during the pandemic, the Sheriff's Office has not delivered and fulfilled the promises necessary by the Public Safety Levy. Next slide, please. Holiday Farm fire obviously had a huge impact for quite a while with the Sheriff's Office this year. One of the significant impacts that we felt was that during the fire, one of our radio towers literally burned up, caused significant communication issues for our public safety, both our law enforcement and fire personnel who were responding. There were periods where they just didn't have the ability to communicate while they were doing evacuations. This radio tower, we purchased a temporary portable radio trailer as a temporary solution, but we're still in the works of trying to rebuild and fix that as a long-term solution. During the Holiday Farm fire, the Sheriff's Office had to significantly rearrange its scheduling patterns. This was done for multiple reasons. The Operations Support Division manned the call center for the Emergency Operations Center, where they were communicating with those who were impacted by the fires, those who were in the evacuation zones, giving information out to where the road closures were, who could go home, if their property was lost. They also did a significant amount of work on the missing person cases. At one point during the Holiday Farm fire, we had up to 230 reported missing persons. The work between the Operations Support Division staff, our Criminal Investigations Unit, and our missing persons employee ultimately tracked down all 230 people and were able to tell their family members that they had been found and that they were safe. This patrol had to change their staffing levels so that they could so they could provide services to those areas that were impacted by the fires. And that created like a 12 on, 12 off pattern for many weeks. So that not only could we respond to the evacuation zones and the road closures and the fire impact areas, but also respond to our other emergency calls of service throughout the rest of the county. Thankfully, the Board of Commissioners recognized the need to have some enhanced law enforcement services in the fire impacted areas and authorized funding for 2 district deputies in the fire impacted areas. We're very thankful for that. They've already done some great work in that area. and but funding for those positions long-term is yet to be identified. Next slide, please. So Sheriff's Office has several capital improvement projects in planning phases or in development. Two that I'd like to highlight today is a study for Sheriff's Office remodel. Sheriff's Office is physically separated by a public hallway, creating additional safety issues and inefficiencies at the office. The fixtures and finishes at the Sheriff's Office are unsanitary, they're outdated, and they're outside their normal life expectancy. The layout of the Sheriff's Office creates the cramped, unprofessional, and inefficient work areas for staff to work in. The design of the office as is creates safety issues as it does not allow for physical distancing, and it's not welcoming or professional to those from the public who come to seek services from the Sheriff's Office. Our reception area is literally a hallway that is used by the rest of the courthouse and public service building. You can see in the picture to the right of this bullet point that's our reception staff stacked in like cordwood with all kinds of plexiglass separating them so they can continue to do their work during the pandemic times. Our other highlighted capital improvements project is the need to revamp our central control. Central control is basically the heart of the Lane County Jail. Our control operators manage movement and throughout the jail and send staff to emergencies and open all the doors and close all the doors. These staff members monitor in excess of 60 cameras at a time and open all the doors in the jail. The central control is obviously manned 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It's cramped. There's no restroom available for the staff who are assigned there. And much of the equipment in central control is outdated and no longer available. Some of the toggle switches that we use in this control room, we literally search online until we find somebody who's getting rid of them, and we buy every piece of them that we can find because the technology is not there. PLCs and touchscreens that interact with upgraded audio and visual systems are needed to achieve the industry standard for the central control room. It's our recommendation that the central control room be moved to a satellite control room so that we can have these upgrades for safety and security of the facility. Next slide, please. The Office of the Sheriff is basically the sheriff and his administrative executive assistant. The sheriff oversees all operations of the Sheriff's Office. He works closely with our elected officials and other department directors, and with our partners at the local, state, and federal level regarding all public safety issues. Next slide. The Operations Support Division. This division was previously named the Administrative Division. However, we renamed it to the Operations Support Division this year to more clearly identify what it actually does and what it encompasses. Most of this division is not administrative in function. Most of this division gives direct customer service to our public members and supports the law enforcement and emergency responder system as a whole. Some of the areas within our Operations Support Division is our civil processing section, our concealed handgun license section, our dispatch section, our fiscal section, our property evidence section, and our radio infrastructure section. Next slide, please. Sheriff's Office Operations Support Division doesn't, as I previously mentioned, doesn't really have the ability to work remotely. Therefore, our staff has had to come to work every day of the pandemic. And we've had to make a lot of accommodations to make our staff and the public safe because of the pandemic. We used to kind of have a drop-in method where members of the community could come in and ask questions and get service. And that's almost been changed to, hey, schedule an appointment and then the sheriff can help you. So we're not providing the best customer service there, but we are trying to do our best. Some of the things we've done to help control or provide that customer service that people have grown accustomed to from us is that some of our areas that are statutorily required, like CHL and civil process, have been making changes like offering weekend appointments to help fulfill these requirements and better serve the community. One of the other things that I'd like to point out is during this time of the pandemic, Things like printing has been prioritized so that people seeking medical employment are the highest priority for fingerprinting. There's been a loss of some revenues because of the pandemic, and we've just had to change the way we do service, and not traditionally the way the public is recognized or how we do it. Some things have been good, some things have been less good. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights from the last year is our radio infrastructure has had some improvements done. We're still, trying to make modifications from lessons learned a couple of years ago during the snowstorm, and some of those improvements have been made. Our property evidence unit has still continued to do drug take-backs where family members can bring in outdated or unused prescriptions. Several hundred pounds of that has been destroyed. I mentioned already that the Operations Support Division supported the EOC by doing the call center or staffing the call center, as well as several members of my division were part of the EOC, to include myself for multiple weeks of being the EOC manager. Some of the highlights from our division within this year is dispatch. Between our primary radio channel and our secondary radio channel, not including our other channels used by other dispatch contractors, there were almost 500,000 radio transmissions. There were 135,000 plus telephone calls. There was almost 12,000 911 call transfers to our dispatch center. Our property evidence section took in and lodged over 4,400 items of evidence to include over 300 firearms, over 115 knives, and 22 vehicles. Our CHL section processed almost 5,700 concealed handgun licenses. Our civil section processed almost 4,200 civil documents, 37% of which were protection orders, to include stalking orders and restraining orders. One of the highlights that I like to point out is that staffing is a high priority at the Sheriff's Office, and getting people of character who buy into our culture at the Sheriff's Office of doing the right thing for the right reasons. One of the things we've done in the last year and a half is reinstitute our cadet program to recruit young adults who have an interest in the law enforcement field. We've had 2 successful recruitments of cadets so far. I'm excited to say that 80% of the people that we've taken on as cadets and offer mentorship and training and, excuse me, a pathway to a career with the Sheriff's Office have been female. I'm also very excited to say that this month we'll be hiring our first cadet as a sworn deputy. And I'm very excited for her to have her start date. Next slide, please. As we talk about our civil process, we've actually had a 7%, even under times of COVID, 7% increase in civil documents that have been processed, while there's been a 75% decrease in FED eviction processing. What that tells me is that even though we've done more work under unique circumstances, is that there's going to be, once the moratorium on FED evictions is lifted, that there's going to be a lot of work coming into the Sheriff's Office, and we'll be processing a lot of FED evictions. And so that work unit that's already working more than they did under the current pandemic conditions is going to have a lot more work. Field-based reporting is an exciting thing that is occurring. Sheriff's Office has been using a e-case program that manages our jail records management system, our police records management system, and our CAD system. But deputies we haven't fully integrated the whole use of that program, and deputies have been writing reports on paper, which then have to be logged by our records officers and stored. As you can see in this picture, we have rooms full of paper. This new field-based reporting system will allow deputies to input information into our system that will be integrated, and they will talk to each other, and we'll be able to maximize some of the data or use the data that will immediately be entered versus having staff entering reports that are being read after the fact. Records is moving to a new state reporting standard that will eventually help streamline our data entry. This effort also kicks off the process of scanning new records into the RMS system and scanning 30 years worth of police records. This will bring a more data-rich environment to the Sheriff's Office and will reduce the amount of paper the Sheriff's Office will be using. Staff out in the field will now be able to actually use their NDCs or their mobile data computers to access case reports and share information and be more efficient in their work. The Sheriff's Office is also continuing to explore new partnerships and opportunities at several locations for our radio infrastructure, which will increase coverage for our first responders. One of the locations that we're looking at is in Dead Mountain in the Oak Ridge area. Again, we're still trying to move forward from lessons learned from the Snowmageddon event of a couple of years ago where Oak Ridge was almost completely cut off. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Greg Rice, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Corrections Division.
Thanks, Chief Deputy, and good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, and committee members. I'm Lieutenant Jason Moore. I'm going to cover the first part, and then Lieutenant Greg Rice will cover the second part. I'll give you a quick introduction to our facility. We currently have a maximum of 382 beds. We also house our alternative programs and what's known as the Sherman Center or the DOMC. We have two contract companies that work inside the facility. Our medical and mental health services are provided by WellPath, and our laundry and kitchen services are provided by Trinity. The Sherman Center, as I mentioned before, that's where the electronic surveillance program, the jail population management team, our sheriff's work crew, our community service, and the sit-in program all take place. A majority of our adults in custody, or referred to as AICs, are pre-trial, with the remainder being sentenced. And many of our offenders are placed on release agreements with conditions established by pretrial services in the courts once they're released from our custody. The alternative program section works hard to get these folks out of jail and get them into an alternate program of one sort or another that I mentioned before, freeing up crucially needed remaining jail beds for our more serious offenders. This allows those folks to be home in the evenings with their family, maintain that connection with their family life, with their employment, and coming in during the day and being held accountable with as few barriers as possible. Next slide, please. COVID-19, early last year, we assembled a committee of various disciplines within the facility, including our medical staff, our admin staff, our supervisory staff. We met at least once a day, in the beginning, multiple times a day, working out the policies and procedures that we need to follow to best combat this global pandemic. As you can see, to date, our medical staff, which has been crucial in supporting us through this pandemic, has administered over 6,400 tests, with over 6,000 of those being negative, 138 positive results. And to date, I believe at last count, we're around 175 vaccinated AICs, and around 470 that refuse the vaccine. We decided early on to reduce our maximum capacity to 260. We did this to encourage social distancing, allow time in between day rooms for those day rooms, phones, tables, things like that to be disinfected in between those folks. We brought our AICs out one at a time, so there wasn't any possibility of spreading. When an arrestee is brought in by an arresting agency, we implemented them staying in the vehicle, and we would have medical go out, do a temperature check, do a questionnaire, and decide the best course of action, all to keep that separation of space, again, to slow down the spread. Since early last year, we've provided masks to all of our staff and AICs as well. And as you can imagine, with the nature of our facility and the nature of our work, we were not able to work remotely. So we provided our staff with as much PPE as possible to keep them protected, as well as keep our AIC population protected as they interacted throughout the day. I want to highlight our excellent maintenance staff and our IT staff. They quickly put together audio and video for the courtrooms as well as in the housing areas. We limited the number of people that we allowed from the outside into the facility, which included our volunteers for yoga and for clergy. And so our maintenance and IT staff quickly got together video options so that attorneys could visit their clients remotely, and things like court could be held remotely as well. And many of these projects were completed same day. So which just amazing job by our maintenance staff. We reached out to our clergy and to our yoga and AA and those kinds of volunteers, and all of them sent in video disc so that we can continue to provide those services to our inmates without having that in-person interaction. Because of all these implementations, we've prevented any significant outbreaks and kept our folks safe. And with that, I'll turn over to Lieutenant Rice.
Thank you, Jason. Next slide, please. Thank you, committee. I'm Lieutenant Greg Rice, and I'll be taking over for us the correction presentation. We'll start with some of the highlights. The first one I want to talk about is the Electronic Surveillance Program, also known as ESP, which was part of the RRC budget, but it will become a standalone program in this next fiscal year. ESP monitors approximately 80 individuals a day, which equated to about 442 unique pretrial defendants and sentenced offenders supervised by ESP in fiscal year 1920. This next fiscal year, ESP will grow to approximately 150 individuals being monitored each day, with the goal to grow the program as technology expands. Most individuals who are sentenced to jail receive a shorter sentence. ESP provides another avenue for individuals to serve that sentence when other alternative programs like road crew might not be appropriate. ESP allows individuals to maintain employment, housing, and family connections while serving these short sentences. Court staff that work in pretrial services utilizes a risk assessment tool while reviewing pretrial defendants for potential release. ESP provides another resource for pretrial services to encourage compliance with release conditions and reduces the utilization of limited jail beds by low risk offenders. Court staff and pretrial services and deputies assigned to alternative programs work closely to manage the jail population, and ESP is vital in assisting with management of the limited jail beds so that these beds are used for higher risk individuals. Research shows that individuals who are able to maintain employment, housing, and community ties are less likely to reoffend. ESP provides individuals the opportunity to maintain those core fundamentals to be productive members of the community while maneuvering through the court system or serving their sentence, which benefits our community in the long run. Through the COSAC grant, a MAP program with recovery support services, specifically peer support and transitional housing, is being implemented. The goals of the program are to improve treatment options, establish and expand connections to community-based services, and reduce recidivism rates for adults in custody who have substance use disorders. Program service targets are to engage 20 people per month with MAP and 100 people per month with education and counseling by a certified drug and alcohol counselor. Our program allows individuals who are already on a MAP program to continue to receive their medication while in custody, and for those who start the program in custody can be referred to community partners so they can continue with MAP programming. Traditionally, programs inside a correctional facility require participants to be sentenced for a certain amount of time, like for example 60 days, and be minimum custody. We are doing things different and removing these barriers. It doesn't matter how long someone is in our custody or what classification they are. If they want help, we are going to do everything we can to provide them these services. We contract with Transponder to bring LGBTQIA+ training to all of our employees. The goal of the training is to provide staff with knowledge, awareness, and insight into the unique considerations faced by members of the LGBTQI+ community, especially when housed in a correctional facility. Through the training, staff learn specific tools for supporting the well-being of LGBTQI+ individuals and how to de-escalate situations when misunderstandings or unintentional actions of our staff invoke a trauma response. Transponder is also providing consultation to assess our policies as they relate to LGBTQI+ individuals, and individual consultation as needed on case-by-case basis to address the specific needs of the individual. Over 90% of corrections staff, to include contract staff, has received the training, with the goal to have 100% of staff receiving the training by July 2021. The training has also been incorporated into the training curriculum for all new employees to receive. In 2018, 5 employees became certified trainers in verbal de-escalation curriculum. Since then, our in-house trainers have been diligently working on providing this training to staff. COVID disrupted our training plan, but currently over 90% of corrections deputies have received verbal de-escalation training, with the goal to have 100% of staff receiving the training by July 2021. De-escalation training has been incorporated into the training curriculum that all new deputies receive. We are currently developing a verbal de-escalation training curriculum for civilian staff, with the goal of implementing the training by July 2021. This year, we modified the graveyard schedule to allow shift briefings to occur. This has allowed us to increase communication, provide training, and invest more in our staff. In collaboration with the Live Well Center, we have developed a wellness program for the Corrections Division staff. The goal is to provide employee wellness, resiliency, and mindfulness training to staff so they are better equipped to not only manage the stressors of the job, but also the stressors in their everyday lives. We want our staff to reach retirement healthy in mind and body, along with their relationships with family and friends intact. Next slide, please. We have currently outgrown the design of the jail, and the layout is inefficient, staff resource intensive, and not designed for the type of defendants and offenders currently being housed, creating a supervision challenge. A jail facility needs analysis is being conducted by a firm that specializes in correctional facilities, architecture, best practices, and AIC management and business practices. Through this analysis, we want to identify what we can do now to increase efficiency and safety. For example, having secure interview booths and audio-video kiosks in housing areas so AICs can have a safe and private meeting with a mental health staff, attorneys, or other community partners, while also looking towards the future needs. An example of a future need is the top picture. That is a cell door in the intake housing area that maintenance has had to keep shaving due to the floor slowly sinking over time in the housing area. There are several doors like that in the intake housing area. We must continue to proactively anticipate correctional system challenges and make structural and procedural changes to maintain local, state, and federal expectations. There is a significant population of individuals who have a mental health disorder in our facility. We have been proactive with engagement with community partners to find ways to divert individuals away from the criminal justice system when appropriate. We do not have the tools and support to manage this population that would be better served not in the criminal justice system. We see firsthand how the lack of a true crisis system in Lane County has a negative effect on our community and puts a strain on the criminal justice system that should not exist. From the FIT team to an actual crisis center, we are committed to working with our community partners in the development of a crisis system. The need to hire and train new staff to meet federal, state, LCSO, and community standards is essential and challenging. This process requires a minimum of 23 weeks of on-the-job training plus 6 weeks at the Correctional Academy before a deputy is ready to independently fill a position. With fewer and fewer applicants applying for vacant positions in law enforcement agencies across the state, we must be innovative in our recruiting to compete with other agencies. One of those innovations is how we conduct interviews. We have modified our questions and take the time to learn the character of the applicant. We can train people to be competent in their job duties, but people either have character and ethics or they don't. It is important that we hire people who have good character and strong ethics. We talk with the applicant about our culture, the fact that we believe that it is important that deputies start in corrections so we all have a common foundation. We treat everyone with respect. We all have different roles within the sheriff's office, but each of these roles are all equally important, and we do the right thing for the right reasons. We talk about how we invest in our staff through the wellness program and how we have a family atmosphere. We want applicants to want to be part of the family just as much as we would like them to join our family. We have a strong history of developing leaders from within our organization. For example, every single person that is in a command position right now all started as a deputy in corrections. Furthermore, each lieutenant that speaks with you today all participate in our career development program. The Corrections Division must continue an aggressive succession plan for potential leaders due to multiple supervisors and managers retiring in the next few years. And that is all I have to present. I'm now going to turn this presentation over to Lieutenant DJ Mann.
Thanks, Greg. I'm going to switch gears to the Police Services Division. This first slide, actually, I guess we better advance the slide. Yes, okay. This slide highlights the key components of the Police Service Division. Main Office Patrol is the largest section of the division. It provides law enforcement services to unincorporated Lane County. The Criminal Investigation section is our detectives unit that serves unincorporated Lane County and our contracts on the most serious and complex cases like homicide investigations. Search and Rescue serves all of Lane County, including our incorporated cities. Court Security and Prisoner Transport also serve all of Lane County residents by keeping the courthouse safe and facilitating transportation of people who are in our custody. Then we have our contract law enforcement services that include Marine Patrol, funded by the Oregon State Marine Board, a new domestic violence investigator funded by the District Attorney's Office, 2 Bureau of Land Management deputies funded by BLM, and a commercial motor carrier enforcement deputy, also known as a Waymaster. This position is funded by Public Works. A Dunes deputy funded by the Oregon State Parks to provide law enforcement in heavily used recreational areas. Our 2 biggest contracts are for police services for the cities of Creswell and Veneta. All of these contracts seem to be going very well as the Sheriff's Office gets a lot of positive feedback from our funding partners. The final component is our 2 recently funded law enforcement districts, providing 2 West Lane County deputies and 2 McKenzie recovery deputies. Okay, next slide, please. Currently, Main Office Patrol is staffed with 25 deputy sheriffs, which allows us to schedule enough staff to provide 24-hour response to emergency calls for service without dropping below minimum staffing levels. Minimum staffing levels are designated as 3 deputies and a sergeant for both day shift and swing shift. And then during the graveyard hours, we drop down to 2 deputies and a sergeant for graveyard. That's the minimum we can run the shift with. Most residents of Lane County fall under this level of service. During serious calls, you will sometimes see more than 3 deputies and a sergeant because contract deputies are often routed to stabilize a volatile scene. However, there are a few hours, most days, in which there are only 2 deputies and a sergeant in service for the entire Police Services Division. When additional deputies are needed during this time, they must be called into service from their homes. We do rely on help from the Oregon State Police, but their local office does not staff 24-hour patrols, and there are times when they are unavailable. An example is that some of our local state police were often assigned to the Portland area during the civil unrest. Main office deputies mainly respond to in-progress calls that involve threats to safety of our residents. These deputies are busy running call to call across our very large county. The deputies have very little time to devote to self-initiated activities like traffic enforcement. When they are not working a new call, they often have follow-up work that needs completed on previous cases. Our county patrol deputies regularly complete serious felony investigations that in many other jurisdictions would be assigned to a detective or a special investigation unit. Okay, next slide, please. We'll talk about some of the impacts to our division by COVID. Staff in the Police Service Division are unable to work remotely and have continued normal operations throughout the pandemic. Lane County authorized employees to sell additional hours of time management, resulting in additional $157,000 expense. And some of our deputies did have to quarantine because of COVID. In order to meet minimum staffing levels, overtime was required to staff some of these shifts. The result was about $21,000 of additional overtime costs. The Sheriff's Search and Rescue Unit and other Sheriff's Office personnel have been heavily involved in the COVID-19 vaccination process throughout the county. Mass vaccination clinics have taken a significant amount of our SAR managers and volunteers' times, which competes with ongoing training and readiness for real-world SAR missions that continue to occur.
I think the.
Is my volume all right, guys?
Yeah.
COVID has increased the cost and reduced private shuttle options for bringing out-of-state fugitives back into Lane County for court proceedings. The result is that our transport deputies are now making far more out-of-state trips for extraditions. Okay, next slide, please. Now, we'll talk about some of the highlights of last year. The Holiday Farm Fire was LCSO's biggest call of last year. Although tragically one life was lost, the Sheriff's Office played a key role in preventing additional loss of life and helping coordinate the massive efforts it took to mitigate the effects of the fire. The Lane County Board of Commissioners funded 2 McKinsey recovery deputies in addition to 2 West Lane district deputies. These deputies are providing an enhanced level of service to their assigned communities. We already have had many examples of great community policing being done in these communities. A McKinsey recovery deputy used his local knowledge and community contacts to recover a young out-of-state girl who had been kidnapped by a family member. West Lane deputies are partnering with West Lane Mobile Crisis Response to assist community members in mental health related crises. All of these deputies are actively working cases and addressing specific needs of their communities in ways that are simply not possible without having deputies dedicated to these districts. The Sheriff's Search and Rescue Program has been working side by side with Lane County Public Health to provide efficient mass vaccinations to Lane County residents. Over 6,500 hours have been volunteered to the vaccination efforts. The Sheriff's SAR group has actually administered well over 10,000 shots. The vaccination work is in addition to the normal busy SAR workload, which includes maintaining training and readiness while responding to nonstop real-world rescue missions for all of Lane County's residents and the people that are visiting our county. The SAR group is managed by 2 paid coordinators who currently oversee 199 SAR volunteers. I just saw another application, so I think we're about to be 200. Another highlight of the last fiscal year would be the very successful Waymaster Deputy contract funded by Lane County Public Works. Deputy Favre has been extremely busy ensuring that commercial motor vehicles are operating safely on our roads. He puts vehicles out of service and issues citations for dangerous activities, including transporting fuels in a prohibited manner and operating grossly overloaded vehicles. Deputy Favre also handles around 50 abandoned vehicle complaints every month. He recently attended an advanced accident reconstruction training and is assisting the Lane County Fatal Crash Investigation Team in their efforts to reduce fatal traffic crashes. Additionally, Deputy Favre addresses lane code violations related to RVs that illegally dump sewage onto the ground or into storm drains. The criminal investigations section with 4 detectives and a sergeant continue to investigate a high volume of sex crimes, serious assaults, homicides, and child abuse cases for our service population of 117,558 people. In comparison, the city of Eugene, with approximately 50,000 more residents, has 34 FTEs assigned to their detective units. LCSO's detectives occasionally assist the cities of Cottage Grove, Oak Ridge, Florence, and Junction City with serious felony cases occurring in their jurisdictions. In 2020, Lane County detectives investigated 5 homicide cases and 14 criminal shooting investigations where the victims survived, and this is all in addition to their regular daily caseload. Sheriff's Office detectives assisted in investigating 5 officer-involved shootings as LCSO co-chairs the interagency deadly force investigation team tasked with investigating when local police agencies use deadly force. One of these 5 cases involved LCSO using deadly force. 5 deputy sheriffs completed a 32 to 40 week training process, including police academy and field training, and are now able to work independently of the field training officer. There are an additional 5 deputies in field training scheduled to be completed sometime mid-August. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant Rich Glessner, and he'll finish out the Police Services Division.
Thank you, DJ. Good afternoon, everyone. Currently in police services, our biggest challenges, they revolve around our staffing levels. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. Starting at the top right, the top left there, digital forensics. Currently, police services is in need of a dedicated position for trained forensic examination of computers, cell phones, other electronic devices. Due to the prolific use of these items in various crimes, the proper examination is frequently a key component, even in our most routine investigations. Talked a little bit about the criminal investigation section. Again, these are detectives. At current staffing levels, CIS, it only allows for investigation on most serious crimes. We're talking about the homicides, child abuse, sexual assault cases. Other crimes, including the felony level property crimes, significant person crimes, those are all being handled at our patrol officer level and often not receiving the level of fault necessary for a successful prosecution. Reducing traffic fatalities. We've heard a little bit about this. For years, Lane County has experienced a record number of traffic fatalities and currently hovers 3rd in the state in total traffic deaths. Due to budget cuts in 2008 and 2012, the Lane County Sheriff's Office has seen an 88% reduction in the number of citations issued for dangerous driving behavior. Enforcement is one of the 3 needed components in reducing fatalities and significant injury crashes. At our current staffing level, the Sheriff's Office has very little, if any, time to be proactive in traffic enforcement. We do receive state traffic grant monies that allows us, that lets deputies focus on enforcement and the dangerous driving behavior on an overtime basis. This only occurs 2 or 3 times a year. And lastly, training new deputies. It takes almost a year for a patrol deputy to attend the police academy and then complete that field training. Currently, we have 5 deputies in various phases of that training. In addition, we have several deputies and supervisors that are at or nearing that retirement age. Due to this, the Sheriff's Office anticipates being in a heavy training cycle for the next several years. And next slide, please. Okay, when we talk about our patrol deputies on the road, we all know how large and spread out Lane County is. Lane County Sheriff deputies cover over 4,600 square miles. We serve 117,000 people. With 3 deputies and 1 supervisor on duty, It is not uncommon for deputies to travel hundreds of miles a shift handling calls for service, and this definitely delays that response time. Next slide, please. Here's a slide that shows the number of deputies per 1,000 residents in Oregon County, other Oregon counties, as well as Lane County. We did adjust Lane County's data to our most current numbers. We got these numbers from the 2020 OSSA Sheriff Survey. As you can see, even with the most recent additional 4 deputies, we're sitting at 0.17 per 1,000 residents. Clackamas County, Marion County, these are our two closest comparable counties with 0.3 deputies per population. In order for us to reach 0.3, we would have to hire and train approximately 60 additional deputies. And it should be noted that Lane County's population has been growing about 1% a year. Next slide, please. So the Sheriff's Office received 63,434 calls for service in 2020. And we talked a little bit about them, but we all are aware of the high-profile calls like the Holiday Farm fire and the Butler Road call, where 100 rounds were fired at our deputies. But among these calls, there's many other examples of our community members who've been in desperate need for immediate assistance. I'd like to play an audio clip of a recent 911 call. This was a call where 2 homeowners woke up to find a man in their home stealing items. The homeowner confronted the suspect and he initially ran outside. Once outside, that suspect began walking back towards the homeowner. This homeowner was armed and he fired a warning shot, telling the suspect to stay away multiple times. You can really hear the desperation and panic in their voices as they needed a quick police response. If we can go ahead and play that clip.
Attempted to break into the house and shot the cabinet fire.
They opened up that door.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Okay, they said that her husband shot at the suspect. He left southbound. There's no injuries. Okay. Are you there?
Yes.
Then how long ago did they leave?
They ran out the door. They were headed south. My husband said they were wearing a red and white shirt. They actually, now that I'm out here on my back porch, they have his wallet, my laptop, his camera.
How long ago did they leave? Like 2 minutes, 5 minutes?
Like, yes, minutes. Like, it's just, it probably took me 30 minutes to call, maybe. 30 seconds to call.
Okay.
Yes.
I've got the call on the screen here. My partner's going to work on the internet after guys out in that area. I just want to double check. Is anyone hurt there?
No. No, that's what I'm aware of, but my kids were right next door.
American, something there he is right there. Hey, you come down here, I will shoot you.
Where is he
I
at?
will shoot you.
Where is he at so we can tell her
I'll
that?
hole in you. Because you were in my house.
Kenneth, I need you to tell me where he's at. Where is he at?
Stop right now. Stop coming down. Don't come down here. I promise you, I will put a hole in you. Don't do it. Don't come down here. Don't come down here, man. Get out. You come
Where is
down
he
here,
at?
I will shoot you. I have a gun. Don't come down here. He's pushing me.
Where is he at?
You come down here, I will shoot you.
Kenneth, where is he at?
He's 20 feet from me.
Is he at that point?
Okay, so in this case, the suspect eventually got in his car and fled. All the while, we had deputies responding. Code 3, that's where our lights and sirens going. Deputies were able to identify the suspect and the car he was fleeing in. They stopped the suspect and they were able to arrest him. This was 20 minutes after that initial 911 call. That 20 minutes was actually significantly reduced simply due to the fact that the suspect was fleeing in the same direction of our responding units. And I'll sum it up with each additional deputy we put in the field decreases the overall response time, and helps ensures a better resolution in every one of these traumatic instances. And with that, I'm going to turn you back over to Chief Deputy Wilkerson to finish it up.
Okay, can you hear me this time? Okay, perfect. I'm back in my office. The Lane County Sheriff's Office supports the Lane County Strategic Plan. For safe and healthy county, the Sheriff's Office provides emergency response to life safety events, investigates person and felony crimes, and maintains the jail to hold pretrial defendants awaiting trial. Sheriff's Office also has our search and rescue program that serves all members of the community and communities from outside of Wayne County, as we know that they often travel to our beautiful community to recreate and oftentimes need the services of our search and rescue volunteers and staff. Our vibrant community. Sheriff's Office is committed to providing public safety services to make the community safer. Adequate law enforcement services and investigations will only naturally increase the likelihood for businesses to want to be here and for families to relocate here. Sheriff's Office supports the robust infrastructure, providing numerous programs to help the community. Specifically, one of our alternative programs is our road crew program. Road crew program provides service by improving public lands by performing a variety of services to include litter pickup and invasive species removal. People and partnerships. That's really what all the Sheriff's Office is all about. Sheriff's Office is about people and partnerships. Sheriff's Office is constantly working with our community partners and other organizations to improve the community as a whole. Sheriff's Office is always working with our public health and Wayne County mental health in trying to find ways to improve the system as a whole. The Sheriff's Office, as recently mentioned by Lieutenant Mann, has partnered with Wayne County Public Health with our search and rescue program to deliver thousands and thousands of doses. That's our staff, our volunteers and our staff actually putting plungers in people giving vaccination. As mentioned, at running, we're at over 6,500 hours of volunteer time because of this operation. Next slide, please. Talking about our performance measures. The Sheriff's Office has a goal of increasing our patrol staff. We'd like to have our number of patrol deputies per 1,000 to be comparative to our comparable counties, closest being Marion County. Wayne County has the lowest ratio and heavily relies on our partner agencies to assist us in our emergency response calls. Sheriff's Office, as mentioned, is about half of what our comparable county in Marion County has. Citizens self-report forms. These are forms that are filled out by our citizens to report crimes that we don't respond to. There are oftentimes crimes or criminal complaints like criminal mischief, burglary, hit and run, most thefts, and forgeries. Average CSR return rate is less than 50%. We know residents often don't bother even reporting these crimes because deputy may not be available. The Sheriff's Office recognizes having citizens complete their own criminal reports is very poor customer service, and it skews the actual crime statistics. CSRs are not issued to places like the cities of Creswell and Veneta where they have enhanced law enforcement services. Each additional FTE could reduce the use of the CSR by our citizens and allow us to provide a better service to our community. Next slide, please. Response times for emergency calls of service for specifically assault and domestic violence. It's the goal of the Sheriff's Office to respond to these calls within within 15 minutes. Sheriff's Office is currently upgrading our software to better track our response times, as we can't accurately track those calls for service, but we know we are not within that bubble. This is kind of a starting point for the Sheriff's Office so that we know where we want to shoot for and what our metrics are to get there. It's important for the Sheriff's Office to track the number of corrections bookings. This is the number of people who are booked into the jail by both the Sheriff's Office and other law enforcement organizations. Tracking bookings is an important metric to include what kind of charges people are being launched on. These numbers will be helpful for future assessment and needs to include planning for a crisis center or moving towards a jail divert system. Next slide, please. It's also important for the Sheriff's Office to track their capacity-based releases. These are the releases that are made due to the Sheriff's Office, Wayne County Adult Correctional Facility, reaching their federal maximum cap. There have been no capacity-based releases of Measure 11 adults in custody since the public safety levy has been passed. However, with the COVID, we're certainly stretching on how close we're getting to that number. Maintaining a reasonable number of jail beds and alternative program options reduce the number of CBRs and reduces the risk of releasing violent offenders to the community due to capacity. To go right along with that idea, the Sheriff's Office needs to track its alternative program participant days. Alternative program options are essential for evidence-based correction system, and alternative program options reduce the need for jail beds by providing lower risk pretrial detainees and sentence offenders alternative options, and allows the Sheriff's Office to use the beds for those folks who are such a high risk that they should stay within the confines of the jail while they're facing adjudication of their cases. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the sheriff. All right, everybody, we're in the home stretch now. Last year at the end of our presentation, I was asked, okay, Sheriff, so what's your request? County Administrator Steve Mokrahejski, Public Works Director Dan Hurley, and I had been engaged in discussions surrounding a proposal that would utilize some of the SRS to increase funding for deputies in order to get us closer to that phase 2 of the public safety repair plan. We were having those conversations, and then the holiday farm fire hit. That altered our course a bit. With the same collaboration, we brought forward the request to fund the 2 McKinsey Recovery deputy positions, as well as the 2 West Lane District deputies, in order to respond directly to some specific needs within those geographical areas. The work these deputies are doing is very important and necessary as folks are beginning to try to rebuild up in the McKinsey, having a presence up there. Regarding just if you think about the amount of construction that's going on up there and the amount of construction theft that happens, and I think we're all aware of how expensive building materials are right now. And then West Lane being so geographically difficult for us to serve. So those deputies are doing very important and necessary work. However, adding those positions really didn't address our need to expand the core foundational police service program that provides minimum coverage across the county. Back in 2013, the Police Executive Research Forum recommended to us that we have a minimum of 30 deputies, as well as an additional supervisor and detective, to continue to accomplish the work that we were doing in 2013. So that wasn't add FTE so that you can do more. It was you need to add FTE so that you can continue to do what you're doing. That was based on our 2013 workload, and I can assure you that workload has not gone down since 2013 as the county population has continued to grow. So what is my request at this point? My request is that we continue to seek stable funding in order to increase our police services division into phase 2 of the public safety repair plan. I know we heard from County Administrator Steve Mokrahejski and from Christine Moody last night about the structural balance of funds. And I have to certainly give credit for County Administrator Steve Mokrahejski for the fiscal footing that Lane County has today. I've been a part of Lane County for a little over 30 years, and I definitely recognize the work that he has done to get Lane County in that position. We also heard last night from Christine a little bit about the American Rescue Plan, which did include some SRS-like funding for counties, and we're still waiting to hear more from the federal government regarding guidance for that funding. All of that said, I know that Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley continue to work toward a permanent endowment, which would fund SRS payments to counties in the future with more predictability and stability. And so it's my hope that if those efforts are successful, we can have a conversation about using that stabilized funding source to make these much needed additions to the police services division. And next slide, please. And it is our last. We're going to close here. I just want to share with you the photo on the far left is the Holiday Farm Fire Call Center. Staff there were visited by a wellness therapy dog for a few minutes of stress relief in the middle of that very stressful environment. And then you've heard a little bit about this, but the photo second in from the right is Sheriff's Cadet Callie Allen. And Callie was in our first class of cadets, a program that we reinstituted in 2019. And I'll have the privilege of swearing her in as a deputy sheriff on Tuesday, the 18th of this month. And looking forward to that. With that, we are available for your questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Harold. I'd like to start by first thanking you for the work that you have done in the past and you continue to do to foster an environment that provides for a dynamic public safety program, a program that can pivot when the needs change and that can address the situations that arise that we don't even know are possible. And so I'd like to thank you and your entire team for the work over the last year with things we never even thought we'd ever see in our lifetimes. So thank you for that. And I'll open it up to other committee members. Commissioner Farr.
Very brief, Chair, because we are beyond time already. Sheriff Harold wanted to say a great job to Lieutenants Moore and Rice and Mann and Glessner. Very good presentations, as well as Chief Wilkerson. Thank you. With all the questions that I have, Sheriff, the one that really also the top one I've been meaning to ask you. Every month you attend the Mental Health Summit. You're there with the judges, with the psychiatrists, with a few other law enforcement folks, with the providers throughout the county. How do you justify spending as much time as you spend with the Mental Health Summit? There's a little bit of talk about the Adult Crisis Center and our lack of one in Lane County, but how do you justify spending that much time with the Mental Health Summit?
Yeah, you know, this is so impactful to our operation. In our enforcement division, yes, because we're encountering folks who need help when they're out on the street, but very, very specifically in our corrections operation. You know, the jail unfortunately becomes the last stop solution when folks are struggling because of mental illness or drug addiction, or oftentimes both, and they're struggling to operate in civil society in a way that doesn't cause disruption. And so we end up seeing them at our Lane County Jail. In fact, we just got an update. We have quarterly updates from our medical provider in the jail, WellPath. And for January, February, and March, just real briefly, I'll share. Total number of in custodies receiving medication in January was 343. 122 of those were receiving psychotropic medication. 371 total in February, 132 psychotropic. 396 in March, 142 psychotropic. That's about 33% receiving psychotropic medication. And I'll remind us all, we're operating at 260 beds right now, not 382. So having a proper system to provide help to folks before law enforcement and the jail become the last stop is so important to me. And, you know, I watched, before I was sheriff, I watched our leadership wrestle with this idea that, hey, this isn't our job. We're not supposed to be the mental health hospital. This isn't our job. And we have a fair amount of frustration over that. And ultimately, I watched the Sheriff Trapp said, you know what, if it's our job or not, doesn't matter. We have them in our custody and we've got to figure out a way to address it. So one of the things we've done is we pay for 6 mental health professionals inside our facility. We're the only county sheriff's office doing that in the state, as far as I know. We're partnering constantly with Health and Human Services staff, behavioral health. You heard a little bit about the MAT program and the Impacts program. And so we're working with H&HS on those programs. It's really important to me that we find a way for folks who are struggling with mental illness to get help before they end up in the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is really not at all well designed to treat folks who are having those struggles. So that's why I'm there. It's important to the work we do. It's important to the community we live in. It's a decades-old problem, and we're all working together to see if we can come up with some good solutions.
Commissioner Trigger.
Sheriff.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Sheriff. It's been great getting to know you since I took office. You've been really responsive and accessible, and we've had some great conversations. I appreciate that very much. Just a really quick line item question. Speaking of WellPath, the health services and the food and laundry services combined are increasing by about $650,000. Is that because those contractors are increasing their costs because you anticipate providing more services, improved services? What accounts for that increase?
Yeah, it's a great question. And specifically the food service and laundry service, those were being accomplished with a combination, well, food service first was a combination of a contract staff along with folks who are in custody that were laboring in our kitchen. Similarly, laundry staff was staffed with sheriff's office employees supervising folks who are in our custody doing the work. Sort of related to the last conversation, over the years, we have used adults in custody as labor for those two functions, but we used to house a different type of adult in custody. We used to have folks that would sit in the jail to serve a sentence for driving while suspended, maybe, or DUI. These were folks who were totally capable of taking supervision to do laundry or cook meals. The reality is those folks aren't serving their sentence in our custody anymore. We're getting those folks out on alternative programs. They get sentenced to a 20-day sentence. They're doing sheriff's work crew. They're not physically able to do that. They're doing sit-in. We've talked a little bit today about increasing our electronic surveillance program. We work so hard to get folks who are sentenced to local time, which is usually a pretty small sentence. We work so hard to get them out of the jail to not occupy a jail bed. The folks who are in our custody are not well suited to be able to do the tasks in the kitchen or the laundry. In addition to that, both of our laundry employees retired, and we posted that job and we had 0 applicants. It doesn't pay very well, and it's not a very attractive job. So what we've done is we no longer use adults in custody for labor in the basement. They aren't anymore creating or helping make meals, and they are not anymore doing laundry. That did increase our costs with our contract provider to do those functions. So our food service provider hired additional staff to come in and complete the tasks that once were done by unpaid adults in custody, similar to the laundry. I can't speak directly. You mentioned an increase in contract costs for WellPath, and I can't speak directly to that, but I bet I've got somebody on the line that can. Part of it may be related to the grants that we've got. One of the grants that we got added a person. WellPath is a participating partner in the grant, and so we added a position to be able to do substance abuse disorder screening inside the jail and help get people on the MAP program. But Clint Riley or Debbie Haller, if you want to jump in to address WellPath or Greg Rice, go ahead.
I can do that. And the main reason why the WellPath cost has gone up is the cost of business for WellPath has gone up. So that's the main reason there. Their costs have gone up, and so vice versa, our costs have gone up.
Thank you.
Mr. Hazen.
Thank you, Chair. Just for brief clarification, Sheriff Harold, could you bring up the slide in which you showed the per capita sheriff population? Or could the budget staff bring that up? I just wanted to ask a clarifying question about how that data was normalized. And while that gets brought up, my other question is about the alternative program participant days. You're projecting more than doubling the days for the proposed fiscal year 21-22 from the current year. And is it logical for us to think that there will be a reduction in costs or budget required for jail if the alternative program participant days are doubling? Is that, or are those not really correlated?
Actually, what we're going to be doing by adding alternative program days is help try to keep up with a workload that we frankly aren't equipped to do. Keep in mind that our facility used to have over 500 beds available, and we're operating at 260 right now, but even non-COVID 382. And so we have great collaboration with state courts and the state court release officers who work in our jail. As a reminder, Lane County Jail is a little different than other county jails. I do not have delegated authority from the circuit court judges to make release decisions. Lots of sheriffs do. What we have is we have people who work for the circuit court working in our jail, and they have the delegated authority from the judge to make release decisions. So it's not up to me who's in jail unless they're a sentence defender, and then we can make decisions around how they serve their sentence. Or if I've reached maximum capacity and I have that federal consent decree that says that I have to reduce capacity, so then I'm making release decisions based on a risk assessment. Outside of that, who stays in custody is up to either a circuit court judge or a circuit court release officer who works in our jail. They are doing great work, and they're working hard to put people out on release agreements, third-party agreements, ESP when we have it available, or even on own recognizance. In spite of all that great work of trying to release the low-risk offenders, we still have to capacity-based release people on a very regular basis. So by increasing alternative program, by increasing electronic bracelets, we're giving our partners an additional tool for accountability and for community safety, while we're still trying to manage our limited space in our jail.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, would love to see ways in which we could reduce the jail costs, because obviously they're quite high on a per prisoner basis compared to the alternatives. The question I had here is, you've got a number of enforcement deputies per 1,000 citizens, 0.17 for Lane County. You mentioned elsewhere in the presentation, the population served by the deputies is about 100,000. Is it, I'm not sure how to interpret that, because here I think you're talking about the number of enforcement deputies per 1,000 citizens in the county, as opposed to the enforcement deputies per 1,000 citizens served by the department.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the same for all the other counties listed there. So that's county population and enforcement deputies. The Sheriff's Association does a survey annually on enforcement deputies, corrections deputies, etc. What is noteworthy is that we do primarily respond to 911 calls, etc., to unincorporated Lane County, but we do serve the entire population of the county. For example, there are not Eugene police officers running around inside the city of Eugene serving stalking orders or restraining orders. That's a sheriff's deputy. That's a Oregon revised statute requirement of my office, is to serve court paperwork. So we do serve the full population of the county. The other thing is, I don't have a means of separating out Clackamas's population based on who's in incorporated Clackamas and who's in unincorporated Clackamas. I suppose I could find an extra staff member with nothing to do. Well, no, actually I couldn't, but possibly to try and decipher that for each of the counties. But I actually think, because the Office of Sheriff does have to provide service to the entire county population, comparing against total county populations is actually a better way to go.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And thanks for the great work you're doing.
Other questions from the committee? Commissioner Bernie.
I'm going to zoom out from the details and just point out to this body that no matter how, as our county administrator has said, how structurally balanced the county is, there's massive structural imbalance when you look at some of these divisions and look at the resources versus the demand. When I first entered it's overwhelming to me. And so I feel that, Sheriff, your discussion of if SRS money becomes available and how to start chipping away at those discrepancies, given the fact that all other departments are going to want to chip away too, is compelling to me. And I also want to join the cacophony of thanking you for your service.
Other questions? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to address the fact that over the past year, I have spent probably more than the average commissioner's time with you and your team due to the Holiday Farm fire. And I just want to express my profound gratitude for everything that you and your team have done in response. It was above and beyond. And the coordination of work with all the IOC teams was phenomenal. In that regard, I've gotten to see a lot of the other non-major public perception items that you do. I mean, a lot of people think of the sheriff, and that's the people that are on patrol that pull you over or come to your house when something's happening. But there's just so many other things, as you touched on in our presentation, that your office does or coordinates with, that take a lot of time and expertise. It's a a variety of responses to unique situations. And I can see how it takes a year to train somebody to do even the most entry level of your positions, because that just takes a huge amount of skill. I did have one question on the going to stage 2 or step 2 of trying to get those deputies in, and you had mentioned that the 2 deputies in both McKenzie and West Lane weren't necessarily part of that calculation. I'm wondering if the Mohawk Valley position that's on the ballot, which I hope everybody will vote for, if that will be able to contribute to any of those 5 positions that you seek.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I view these things, so I view our emergency response system out of the main office as that, an emergency response system that's got to be able to be minimally staffed 24/7 to respond anywhere in the county. And then I have a goal of being able to provide an enhanced level of service to communities in Lane County, similar to what we do with our contract law enforcement with Crossville and Veneta, and what we're doing right now with McKenzie and West Lane. I see them a little bit different. I think that my first priority is to try to get that core foundational response team to 30 so that we can do a good job of taking care of, trying not to burn out our staff and hopefully addressing some of our shortcomings on response time. Although ultimately, is 30 going to fix it? No. As you heard earlier, we probably actually need to hire, an additional 60 to really get there. But my first primary goal is try to get that centralized response to 30, while I'm also communicating with various communities if they would like to have this community deputy level of service that we're talking about with Mohawk Valley. The Mohawk Valley deputy, if it becomes a reality, boy, they're going to have all kinds of great opportunity to build relationship, to connect with the community, and to really address community level concerns. And they won't be zigzagging, handling that call load. But I need those 30 deputies to be able to do the zigzagging while the Mohawk deputy is able to spend that time with the community, getting to know them and addressing their concerns. So I kind of see it as a 2-part process. I'd love to find some stable funding to get us to phase 2. And then I want to continue to have these conversations with communities. There's a couple communities that have reached out that have heard about the Mohawk effort, and they've said, hey, Sheriff, what do you think about trying that out in our neck of the woods? So I see a 2-track opportunity here.
Great. Any other questions from the committee?
I want to say I appreciate everybody being complimentary to me today. What a privilege I have to work with 300 fantastic employees. This organization is something else, and the culture of this organization is fantastic. And I definitely wouldn't want this job if I didn't get to work with such great people. So really the kudos go to the great people I get to work with. Thank you, and my apologies to Karen. All of us are just going to keep passing apologies down because we're making you so late.
Thank you, Sheriff. Okay, committee, we need to do a bio break in here. So, but let's do it to 6 minutes here, and let's reconvene at 4:20. And so come back on when you can so we can start right at 4:20. Thank you all. couple of important proposals or presentations to go here, and it was important that we gave time to the DA and the sheriff. So unless there's a big objection for the committee, we're going to let this run past 5. So committee members, Don, what do you got?
I have a hard stop at 5, just to let you know. I'll sign out then.
This will be recorded, so if you would, if you're at your opportunity, catch up on what you missed.
Yeah, I also expect drop off at 5.
As do I.
Okay. Thank you all. Ms. Gaffney, sorry for being late, but let's go forward.
No, I appreciate that. I know there's a lot of work and things to discuss, so I appreciate the Budget Committee tremendously and taking your time with us today. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Karen Gaffney. I'm the Director for Lane County Health and Human Services, and today we're here to discuss 2 of our 9 divisions in the department that are part of the public safety system. Typically, I would start with introductions around the table, but instead, since we are in a virtual room together, I will just tell you who's at the table for our presentation today. With me, and you'll be hearing from each of these people, we have Kachina Inman, who's our Assistant Director, Diana Felix, our Administration and Finance Manager, Pauline Gishoshi, who is our Behavioral Health Manager, and Star Felty, our Youth Services Manager. And I will say the rest of our our Health and Human Services team is here in the room with us to provide some moral support and to help answer any questions that might come up that relate to those other divisions as well. And before I move into the next slide, I just want to acknowledge that we really have a tremendous leadership team at Health and Human Services. And it's a deep pleasure for me to be able to, between today and tomorrow, have you get to know them a little bit. And they've led this largest of the county departments through what has really been a pretty tremendous year. Our focus today is to give you a sense of who we are in Health and Human Services and what we do, and specifically today, how we work as a critical part of the public safety system. So next slide, Diana. This slide reflects the divisions in Health and Human Services, with the 2 divisions that we'll be discussing today highlighted in yellow. I did want to give you today the context of a larger department within which they sit. And across the department there, we really have all of these different service lines, and our work across Health and Human Services is really in service to that larger mission of promoting and protecting the health and well-being of individuals and families and our communities. As I mentioned, and as you probably know, Health and Human Services is the largest of the county departments. In the proposed budget that you're discussing this week, we have 758 FTE that we're proposing, and that is what earns us the pleasure of being able to be with you for 2 days for budget presentations. And while we're focusing on public safety today, I did want to also emphasize that all of this work is connected, and we have a strong value in Health and Human Services around integration, and really believe that that is one of our strong business imperatives. A benefit for us is the different books of business that we have in the department. I think about it almost as our secret sauce of how we're able to creatively leverage those different service types to best meet the specific individual and unique needs of each of the clients who are in front of us. Example of that will be in our department, one of our strategic focus areas, and this mirrors the county strategic plan as well, is on people who are at this intersection between homelessness, behavioral health, and public safety crises. And that particular group is one, we'll talk about 2 of those 3 areas today, but it really is an intersection where I believe we can't address any one of those problems without addressing all of those problems. So you'll see that theme as we walk through our slides and presentation. Next slide, Diana. So this first slide on the budget is about the larger Health and Human Services Department. So again, I want to put our public safety pieces in a little bit of context. The department resources are those revenues that transfer in. Our total budget for the department is $155.3 million. And the primary revenue that comes into Health and Human Services is really a combination of four large sources. The first two by far are our state dollars. And I know this slide's kind of hard to read depending on the size of your screen. So I'll tell you that our state revenue for Health and Human Services is $54.6 million in the proposed budget. And that's followed closely by federal dollars at $49.2 million. Our fund transfers come in at $29.2 million, and that of course includes the general fund, which is almost $15 million of our budget, or about 10% of our operating budget. And then fees and charges for Health and Human Services are at almost $25 million. So that's the revenue we're able to recoup from billing insurance or selling restaurant licenses, etc. So let's go to the next slide, Diana. Talk about expenditures. You can see that overall, Health and Human Services budget is by far a majority in personnel services. We're budgeting a little over $88 million in personnel and about $67 million of expenses in materials and services. And based on what you know about our department, I'm sure that intuitively makes sense. We are in the business of helping people, and so we employ people to do that work. So our budget is largely personnel services. Overall, our proposed budget does reflect about a 22% decrease, and that is largely because of the significant influx we've had in current year for revenue associated with COVID, whether that's rental assistance dollars or public health dollars. And if all goes according to plan, we are going to see the pandemic wind down as we move into the next fiscal year. So we'll have a decrease in those revenues. Next slide. So the next slide starts to look at our public safety sections of the department. So again, that's these are the combination of youth services and behavioral health in the Health and Human Services budget. And you'll see here a similar pattern to the overall department, with our largest funding sources being state and federal dollars. For public safety revenue, we anticipate $20.6 million in state funding and another $11 million in federal resources for our public safety services. And then that's followed by transfers of $8.7 million for public safety services, specifically, general fund transfers of 8.7 that are part of that 14.9. And that's roughly split. Youth services is the part of Health and Human Services that receives the largest portion of our general fund. And so general fund into youth services is about $8.2 million. And behavioral health is proposed to receive $449,000. And that's about 1% of behavioral health expenses. All right, let's go to the next slide. As you heard from the Sheriff's Office, there have been significant impacts for all of our departments related to the Holiday Farm fire. So I did want to take just a moment and acknowledge really some of the tremendous work, particularly out of our behavioral health section in relation to the Holiday Farm fire. Like most departments, Health and Human Services immediately sent staff from our various sections over to the county's Emergency Operations Center. And you'll remember that the fire emergency erupted in the middle of our COVID emergency, where we already had staffed up an Emergency Operations Center. Our In particular, our behavioral health staff, and then we'll talk some tomorrow about human services and some other staff who responded to immediately the human tragedy that was playing out as a result of the fire. And particularly for those residents who lost their homes, our behavioral health staff mobilized very quickly, even during the evacuation phase, stationed at the hotels to provide immediate direct support and services to evacuees who were lodged in hotels, as well as went to work organizing our larger community of behavioral health providers to make sure that we mobilized a system to respond to both the immediate trauma and, quite frankly, the ongoing trauma for those residents who have been impacted most directly. Let's go to the next slide, Diana. Before we get to the specific youth services and behavioral health budgets, I wanted to touch on the parts of the capital improvement plan that we are planning for next year. The 3 items that are highlighted on this slide are all in the pre-planning stage, so they aren't actually budgeted for this year, but it is important in your capacity to know what's on the horizon in terms of capital improvement. And we have them in 2 separate buckets here. The first is really looking at our safety and security systems, both at youth services and behavioral health. We have security systems in both of those buildings, and the buildings are aging. And so we know that we are going to need to do some replacement of those systems in the next couple of years. And then that second bucket around the behavioral health lobby, our clinic there is aging, and it's really amazing. I remember when we built that building and thinking about how our service delivery has changed in the maybe 15 years or so, might be longer now, that building has existed. So we know that we'll need to do some renovation there to make sure that our lobby is set up for safety and security, and really trauma informed for our clients at behavioral health. So those will be coming to you in the future. All right, so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Star Felty, our youth services manager, who's going to tell you a little bit more about her proposed budget.
Good afternoon. I'm going to attempt to move pretty quickly and stay within my time. So Lane County Youth Services mission is to reduce juvenile crime through coordinated intervention and prevention programs that hold justice-involved youth appropriately accountable, provide restorative, rehabilitative, and treatment services for youth and their families using evidence-based best practice and data-driven decision-making, promote healthy family interactions, prevent, reduce, and resolve family conflict, promote victims' rights, and safeguard our communities. Youth Services operates 24/7, has approximately 80 full-time staff, 8 program service units, and is housed in 3 different buildings on the Surbu campus. The 8 units include our administration unit, administration services. We do division management, data management, grants administration, and accounting. In detention, we have a 16-bed detention facility that lodges youth 12 to 17, including youth being held on adult criminal charges. Our supervision services unit, this is services for youth on formal and informal probation, including specialized areas like juvenile drug court and youth with problematic sexual behaviors. We provide treatment services through our Phoenix program. Phoenix is a 16-bed behavioral treatment program for male and female youth involved in the juvenile justice system. We have restorative services and mediation unit. They provide youth restorative and diversion opportunities, including victim offender dialogue, crime impacts class, and minor and possession class. In our mediation unit, we do conflict resolution for families with domestic relations court cases and strength-based parent interventions. We also provide educational and vocational services through our Martin Luther King Education Center. We provide education for youth in both detention and the Phoenix Treatment Program, alternative educational and vocational services for high-risk adjudicated community youth, including horticulture and culinary arts programs. We do workforce investment, and we also do community service and restitution crews for youth. Our program services unit oversees the health services, so that includes medical, dental, and mental health for youth in detention and the Phoenix Treatment Program. They also provide the victim advocate services at the youth level, records management, and administrative support for division-wide work and reception coverage. The Nutrition Services Unit provides approximately 32,000 meals and snacks per year to youth housed in detention in Phoenix and youth in school and on vocational crews at and through the MLK Education Center. Nutrition Services houses the award-winning MLK Culinary Arts Program. Next slide, please. In addition to the goals outlined on the slide in front of you, Youth Services will seek to reimagine and rebuild the division's staffing and leadership structure to cultivate a positive workplace culture, improve compliance, and reduce operational risk. Collaborate with partner agencies, community organizations, and members, and subject matter experts to examine our practices and systems and identify ways to strategically reduce racial and ethnic disparities and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Review practices and programming and implement improvements to ensure adherence to best practice and evidence-based juvenile justice standards and requirements. Create a stronger continuum of diversion programming. Incentivize youth for goal achievement and positive behaviors. Cultivate the resources necessary to take appropriate steps to keep youth from collateral consequences of system involvement. Next slide, please. Some of the major COVID-19 impacts for youth services are outlined for you on this slide. These include lost revenue, increased expenses. The majority of our staff, like many public safety entities, were working on site during the pandemic. We saw reduced volunteer and contractor services and delays in training, facilities improvements, and program development and implementation. However, youth services also had some major accomplishments and achievements in fiscal year 2020-21, and our division is doing some really amazing work, and I wanted to take the time to highlight some of that for you right now. In fiscal year 2020-21, we implemented best practice COVID response to ensure youth and staff safety, and that included universal precautions, medical isolation and quarantine protocols, and COVID testing and vaccination of both staff and youth. We updated and expanded technological infrastructure and access to allow for increased youth safety and engagement. Some examples include, in detention, we ensured minimal service disruptions by establishing virtual court, education, and visitation, both professional and family access. These improvements not only ultimately expanded access, but also eliminated the need to strip search youth when they returned from court, because they did not have to leave the secure area to appear. In Restorative Services and Mediation Unit, we transitioned all mediation, diversion, and family support programs to virtual settings. Some other achievements include, at our MLK Education Center, they transitioned to distance learning, which was quite a feat, then to hybrid learning, and then to in-person learning, which took a lot of effort, and we're very proud of them. Additionally, the MLK horticulture crews transformed the Juvenile Justice Center campus landscape by removing non-native plants and replacing them with more sustainable and water-efficient native species. This project will continue over the next year or so and will ultimately lead to a 50% reduction in watering and a 30% reduction in mowing. The Phoenix program footprint was also expanded to include on-site office and meeting spaces. These resulted in service delivery improvements, including on-site therapists' offices, comfortable individual therapy spaces, meeting spaces for family therapy, a conference room for remote school attendance, and family visitation spaces. The supervision unit also adjusted practices to continue to hold youth accountable when meeting increased youth and family needs when there were decreases in family court and community resources. Successes in this area are reflective of prior investments in incentivization, prevention, skill building, and community partnership collaborations. Additionally, in fiscal year 2021, youth services engaged in division-wide culture work to address workplace culture concerns and cultivate a cohesive workplace in a multifaceted division. We were looking to create an environment that is psychologically safe, connected, efficient, effective, engaged, rewarding, and innovative. And I'm proud to say we've made a huge amount of progress during a very difficult year. 2021 also saw the completion, review, and distribution of the report on racial and ethnic disparities in Lane County's juvenile justice system. Distribution of this report included internal and external presentations and initiating conversations about collaboration with partner agencies, community organizations, and subject matter experts to examine our practices and the systems we engage with, and to identify ways to strategically reduce racial and ethnic disparities and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we've committed to do. Next up is Pauline Gashohi, our Behavioral Health Division Manager. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steph. Good afternoon, Chair and the Budget Committee. I have the honor and privilege of presenting behavioral health today, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. So, excuse me. We are a division that comprises of about 173 employees, and with a proposed budget of about 43 million. Our focus mainly is on enhancing individual and family well-being, and we do this mainly through community connections, integration, and a lot of collaboration with our community partners and stakeholders who are involved in this work. So to better understand our rather unique and complex department, it will be easy to look at the department in two segments. So we have a bucket on programs, and then the larger community systems that comprises of care coordination. And I'll go through each of those in just highlight a little bit of what each one entails so you have a little understanding of each. So we have under programs our largest adult outpatient that serves the severe and persistent mentally ill individuals who are mostly also under the Medicaid program. We also have a child and youth program, and that is done largely out of our clinic here on MLK, but we also have satellite sites at the school-based centers to reach those students that are needing mental health services at the school. We also have forensic services, and as mentioned before, those are largely the folks that we see who are in the intersection between behavioral health, criminal justice, and are often unhoused. And then the other program we have under behavioral health is the medication-assisted treatment that has expanded now to include buprenorphine. We were doing methadone before, but we have expanded it to include buprenorphine as well. We also have mental health crisis services out of our clinic, especially when we are open during business hours. And we partner with our community partners who do our after hours crisis. So we have Kahoot and Whitebird that do our after hour crisis in collaboration, and will refer or share information that we have on mutual clients that we have together for follow-up from the clinic. The last program we have is the Adult Protective Service investigations, and this is the group that does investigations for suspected abuse or neglect of those individuals who are under our programs and who are vulnerable members of our society. Then under the community systems, we have those staff that are doing a lot of the larger systems work, again, with a lot of collaboration with our partner agencies. And the main ones under community systems are staff that are embedded with the two CCOs, so Trillium Behavioral Health and Pacific SOS, and will be and are providing care to those members that are either under Trillium or Pacific SOS to make sure that they are connected with the services that they need. Under that community systems too, we have our choice program, and these are a population that usually will go through the civil commitment process and are needing some extra services in the community to remain stable. So they are, it's a mandate of the state that these populations be monitored and followed to make sure that they're not falling through the cracks. So our staff do a really good job of making sure that they are connected with the resources that they need. And we also have our older adult behavioral health program under community systems, again, looking at our aging population and making sure that they're getting the services that they also are needing. And lastly, we have a system of care wraparound services that is invested in looking at children's services and family systems, again, to also make sure that they have resources, they're well connected, and we're getting services to them when they need them. Next slide. I did want to highlight under the some of our programs, especially since this is something that we are highlighting in our strategic plan. So the programs that fall under the intersection of behavioral health, public safety, or criminal justice, and often unhoused. So these are mandated forensic programs, and oftentimes they are underfunded, and they continue to get larger and larger. So we have a very big growing population under forensic. And what we have found out too is that a lot of these services are not billable because there's a lot of care coordination, a lot of following them through the court system, and a lot of these services often cannot be billed. So under those, we have one of our really growing population is our aid and assist. We often refer to it as 370, the statute. And these are individuals who have committed crimes, but because of their mental illness are not able to aid in their defense. So they're in treatment so they can regain competency to stand trial. We also have under that forensic program pre-commitment investigation services. And these are individuals who are found to be a danger to themselves or others, or are unable to care for their basic needs. So often they will be in the process of investigation, and when found to be either a danger to themselves or others, will be mandated into treatment so they are able to regain stability. We also have a Psychiatric Security Review Board, or in short, the PSRB. And these are people or individuals that have committed crimes, and they're found guilty, but except for insanity. So they're people who would be under a mental health parole, if you will, under the Security Review Board. And we are working closely with that board to make sure that this population is monitored, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're connected with resources, and they're housed. And the other program is the Jail Intercept or Community Courts. And the focus there is a lot of diversion from the criminal justice system. So these folks are at risk of committing crimes, and they are in this system to make sure that they are following through. So there's continuous follow up with the courts and the judges to make sure that they are not falling through the cracks as well. And lastly, it's the Adult Protective Services. That's the one I mentioned before that does investigations for suspected abuse or neglect on vulnerable populations. The other one I wanted to highlight is a new program that we got funded through the Impacts Grant. It's through the Criminal Justice Commission. We got awarded $2.5 million to implement this program. The goal of this program is to be out and about, to do outreach work for this population, again, that is oftentimes very distrustful of our system. So oftentimes when we see them, they are in crisis, and they are often in these high, very expensive systems of care because they're not connected with resources that we have in the community. So we are trying to get ahead of the curve before they get into crisis. And the goal of this team is to build relationships with them, to be there, so eventually they can engage them in services. So we're not just seeing them when they're in crisis, but we're engaging them to prevent them from getting into crisis and then into the criminal justice system. The other program I wanted to highlight is our medication-assisted treatment program. As you all know, we have another crisis in our state, actually in our country, of the opioid crisis. So we're expanding services to make sure that people who need access have access to those services. So we just moved into a new building, and the goal is again to increase capacity and do this work more efficiently. We anticipate that we'll have more encounters, we'll increase volume and encounters as soon as COVID is no longer a thing. And the last one we're hoping to expand is our trial visit monitor program. These will be staff who are tasked with making sure that folks who are going through the civil commitment program are being monitored or being closely followed to make sure that they are following through with their programming. So it's a lot of care coordination and coordinating with the courts to make sure that they're following through with the plan that the courts have outlined for them. Next slide. And in terms of the pandemic impacts, we saw both positive and negative impacts in behavioral health. So one of the positives is that we have seen increased encounters with the ability to reach people where they are through telehealth. So we've seen a decline in our no-show rate. In fact, I think we were running about 20% no-show rate, which is typical and the average across the country, I think. And the last number I looked is we are at about 14% no-show. So we are reaching people who we would otherwise not reach just because we are able to reach them in the comfort of their home. Some of them sometimes have to take 2 or 3 buses to get to our clinic. And now that we're able to use telehealth, they don't have to worry about transportation and the inconveniences to get to a clinic. We have about half of our workforce working remotely, which has been very helpful. And the other half has a combination of on-site and remote work. And with the negative part that we saw in behavioral health is our inability to do groups, which has been one of the methods that we get a lot of encounters, or a lot of our folks engaged in treatment is through group therapy, which we have not been able to do because of the requirement for distancing. And most of our folks are not able to sit through a virtual group therapy. The biggest impact was at the medication-assisted program because of the nature of how we do treatment with the dosing. They were not able to come in to the clinic. So that has significantly declined. And again, they were not able to do groups, which again brings in a lot of revenue. So we saw a loss of about $675,000 in revenue at the medication-assisted program. And with that, I'll hand it over to Katrina Inman for highlights.
Good afternoon. I want to start by highlighting a few of our many outcomes over the past year. Of course, responding to the pandemic has been huge for us, and that means moving many of our services to the virtual space. So to highlight a few of those, at youth services, our restorative services have established virtual mediation, diversion, and support programs. In detention, they've established a virtual court, education, and visitation. At behavioral health, they've also established telehealth services that have not only allowed us to meet the needs of our community right now during this pandemic, but we're learning ways in which we can engage as we move forward and continue to reach some of those hard to reach communities, such as our rural communities. I also want to take a moment to highlight the work that we have done to enhance our crisis system. We have a very committed group of stakeholders in the community working on the planning of this. And you've heard, and this year we've been able to launch our forensic intensive treatment program, meeting the community where they're at. And we look forward to moving some of those other plans forward in the coming year, which I'll talk about in a moment. So Diana, can you move the next slide forward? So speaking of our behavioral health crisis system, this is a huge opportunity for our community. And this year we'll really be focusing on an actual physical crisis center where people can come to get services. And the group that I mentioned is working hard on those planning elements. We also hope to expand our mobile mental health crisis project to really continue to serve and expand our rural outreach. One of our challenges is funding our forensics program. It takes a lot of resource and time, and we are underfunded at the state level, so we continue to advocate for additional resources to support that work. We've had some structural changes and culture changes happen at both behavioral health and youth services. Now we have lane care and behavioral health coming together under one umbrella, which we are really excited about, with the opportunity to look at both the individual level and the community level work, and the way that those two divisions, now one division, will be able to work together more closely. At youth services, you've heard a little bit from STAR around the work around their culture work. They've done a lot of amazing development, both for staff and leadership, and we're excited to see the continued growth and development on that front. And lastly, we continue to examine our systems, our practices, and our programs to make continued improvement. And that looks like furthering our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, continued collaboration with our partners, and expansion of our best practices and evidence-based standards. Next slide, please. I want to highlight some of the many strong connections to our county strategic plan. A safe and healthy county, and under that, a key part of that is behavioral and community health, and we continue to increase access. The FIT team is a perfect example of that. Incarceration and recidivism, we continue to work to our public safety plan and strengthen those evidence-based programs. Vibrant communities, looking at a resilient, diverse, and sustainable economy. We're strengthening restorative services, vocational education, and looking at workforce innovation. And of course, furthering equity is a critical piece of our work at Health and Human Services, and a great way that that is moving forward is with the Red Report that Star mentioned, and the deep commitment, and as we move more into the implementation space in the coming year of furthering that work. Robust infrastructure, facilities maintenance and management. You heard about the great work happening at youth services around the native landscaping, and then new facilities development, our medication assisted treatment. This is such a huge piece of work that has taken time and effort to get there, but that expanded building, or that larger building, will allow us to expand services to our community so that folks can get treatment when they need it, which is so critical. And our people and our partnerships. We've learned a lot about employee engagement this year and resiliency, and we will continue to pay close attention to that and focus. And we can't do this without our partners, and we're grateful for the many partners that we have in the community that make our work possible. Last slide. So I want to highlight our performance measures, which focus on the integrated support for those at the intersection of behavioral health, homelessness, and public safety. You've heard us speak to that a lot this afternoon. I want to highlight two of those. So reduce the incidence of first-time homelessness, and this is data taken from our HMIS system, and reduce utilization of emergency room and public safety by individuals that have more than one behavioral health condition. Obviously, this year has been hard for so many reasons, right? And so looking at the impacts on the economy, the increased behavioral health needs, and the stress of racially related events happening in our country. And so we hope to see these improve over time. And this year has been a hard year for all of us and here in Lane County. But we have dedicated efforts to continue to move these these performance measures forward and look forward to sharing those outcomes with you. And last slide, which now I'd like to open it up to questions, if there's time, Chair.
There is some time. So questions from the Committee to Health and Human Services. Oh, there we go. Commissioner Farr.
Thanks. I paused a second. Just a very quick question. It's regarding the telehealth program that has expanded, of course, during COVID-19. And it allows for extra billing. Two questions surrounding that. One, are we going to be able to continue that post-COVID-19? And two, is that something you would wish to do post-COVID-19 or potentially actually expand the program with giving us a greater ability to reach rural communities and keep people on schedule with their appointments?
So the answer to both questions is yes and yes. So there is work in registration to make these available to people because there are benefits to using telehealth, as we all can attest. We also are very mindful that it's not for everybody. So there are those that would prefer to have face-to-face sessions. So we have to be mindful that there will be that population that doesn't do well with telehealth. But yes, so the goal is to expand, and if we are able to reach those hard to reach populations through telehealth, that would be the goal.
Chair Blodman, Pauline, that's the answer that I anticipated and hoped for, and I'll look forward to seeing how we progress with that in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Becky, for a fantastic team presentation.
Other questions for Health and Human Services? Okay, I think that's it for today.
We will be back again tomorrow, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. We're going to roll right ahead and forward with parole and probation. Mr. Rickoff, are you available?
Yes, Chair Vlodman, committee members. Greg Rickoff, Director of Operations. I'm here, and without further ado, let me introduce the Manager of Parole and Probation, Donovan Dumeier. The county is certainly fortunate to have him. He's going to walk us through this presentation.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here, and you guys have got to be exhausted. So thanks for giving us the time and attention at this late hour in the day. So parole and probation, our mission is to improve the quality of life in Lane County by effectively responding to the risk, need, and promoting positive change. And that's something our parole and probation team takes very serious. In 2013, I always like to convey that it wasn't just something that a new manager brought with some bag of tricks. It really was a team effort where we all came together and really defined what it is we wanted and where we wanted to go. So I always like to throw that out there. Parole and probation consists of 58 FTE. 40 of those are officers, 12 support staff, 5 supervisors, and 1 manager. And all of this to supervise 2,468 individuals in the community, primarily convicted of felony convictions. And I know that in past years, I've talked a little bit about the inverted risk population and the challenges that we face here locally in Lane County. This year, that still very much holds true. As you look at our risk profile, very high risk, we're right at about 1,254 clients, 711 medium, 476 low. As it compares to other counties, if you take Marion County, for example, they have a total of 559 high risk, where we have upwards of 1,200 above. They have 951 medium, and then they have 1,379 low risk people. So if you really kind of compare that to our population, it really is opposite and very much inverted. So that's a challenge that we continue to face. I will say over the years, we've seen those high risk numbers decline. And so that's something that we continue to work on and improving the quality of life. As it relates to specializations, As a learning organization, we take great pride in developing subject matter experts within the county, and we've just developed a lot of people that really cater to the risk and needs of our client population. It's very important to us. Next slide. As you can see, based on the large green Pac-Man, we are 98.67% dependent on state funding. Most of our funding comes from the Community Corrections Act dollars and justice reinvestment. The state budget process operates on a biennial basis. Not knowing our state budget until August or September creates a significant challenge in our local budget process. This is often a moving target for us, and I think as Commissioner Bozovich can attest to, it's definitely a challenge as we're trying to make some very real and hard decisions. Next slide. At the end of the fiscal year, are we there yet?
Not yet. Anyone?
There we go. Did we lose Joe? At the end of the fiscal year, concluding a SAMHSA grant, we'll be losing one FTE, and it really is an incredible employee who served as the treatment court case manager and did a lot of good work in moving that program ahead. In an effort to balance our local budget, we're planning to unfund 2 officers. We expect a retirement and a family-related relocation in the near future. It really is our hope, concluding the state budget process, to retain those 2 positions because the work is still there and very much needed. Next slide. As it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic impacts, revenue loss, our client population drives our funding. Currently, our Lane County population consists of 9.22% of the entire statewide population. This is a decrease from 9.57% in the last biennium. Increased expenses, when we look at future, we are currently working in borrowed space within our parole and probation. Many of you have had the opportunity to tour our current parole and probation space, and so as we expect, moving into a larger facility, we will experience increased space costs and for those services. Next slide. As we look at COVID-19 resource impacts, supervision fees, COVID has not only reduced our ability to collect those fees, but also our clients' ability to pay those fees. So we've certainly counted on supervision fees historically within our operation budget. We expect a $2.1 million reduction in CCA funding and a $400,000 reduction in justice reinvestment. So we're expecting some reductions. Next slide. Looking at the highlights, parole and probation continues to do great work in specialization. Within expanding these efforts, our Justice Involved Women's Initiative, we've actually increased this to 4 officers and 1 victim advocate. This group is doing amazing work at addressing the risk and needs of our Justice Involved women. Also, very much a very real need in Lane County is mental health services. We've developed 3 mental health specialists, and I expect that this will be an initiative that will continue to grow as we have the means to effectively evaluate our clientele. Our relocation to Roosevelt Boulevard is going to enhance our ability to improve the quality of life. Our staff are incredibly excited for this opportunity, and this will give our division the necessary space to effectively perform our duties. And we're really looking forward to this space, and it's been just fun to watch it develop in front of us. The Way Home, also known as the Pay for Success model, has been incredibly successful. This is a strong partnership with sponsors and Homes for Good. And we are seeing just incredible results out of 138 participants, 91% success rate on that program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Next slide. Future challenges and opportunities. COVID has significantly reduced our court's ability to prosecute, which has impacted our probation population. This is not only specific to Lane County. Department of Corrections announced early this week that in the first time in Oregon's history, our probation population is less than our parole population. This has largely led to about a reduction of 25,000 parole and probation clientele in our statewide system. So it's not just a local reality, it's absolutely statewide. But on the opposite side and on the flip side of that, we have identified an increase in our prison releases. COVID has forced commutation to safely house adults in custody within the Department of Corrections and clemency for medically vulnerable related individuals. This has accelerated the transition for approximately 75 individuals on parole entering into our Lane County community. Next slide. And as you can see, our Lane County strategic plan, through the nature of our work, we largely land within the safe, healthy county category of our strategic plan. Without question, our work contributes to the vibrant communities and improving the quality of life. Our relocation efforts at Roosevelt are contributing to the county's infrastructure, and we value our partnerships. We are incredibly blessed to partner with some amazing people who share our professional values, support our mission, and assist us in improving the community we live in. Next slide. When we're looking at measuring performance, this is something that we do very regularly within our parole and probation profession and here in Lane County. Our collaboration, innovation, and commitment are yielding some incredible results, just amazing fruit that's occurring here. Our Justice Evolved Women's Initiative continues to see reductions in risk. And given our COVID and our court's inability to prosecute, we shouldn't toot our horn too loudly. That being said, I will say that we have continually seen reductions in the risk of the women that we're incorporating these strategic risk need principles on. So as you can see in 2017, 11.25%. And I don't know about that April 2021. That's kind of an anomaly with COVID, but I think more realistically, when you're looking at that 7.2%, we're seeing clear benefits there. Reduction in recidivism, again, with the vibrant communities, we continue to see reductions within our risk, and we're defining risk as new criminal charges. The way home, as I talked to a little bit earlier, partnership with sponsors, Homes for Good, we're seeing a 91% success rate and approximately 130 individuals served there with that initiative. And I just want to point out that we're not talking about low-risk individuals. We're talking about prioritizing these resources to the highest risk. And by statewide standard, that carries up to, with a very high-risk individual, 50% reduction or 50% recidivism rate. And we're seeing less than 10 with a very high-risk population. So something is working there. We've got incredible people doing the work and incredible partnerships. Prison diversion 416. This is really our effort to, intervene and really use supervision and assessment as a vice to eliminate the need for prison where there are no resources. And within our practices, we're seeing business as usual model. In revocation, we've identified a 48% reduction in revocations and a 90% reduction in new crimes. So again, another program that's just yielding incredible fruit for our county. And with that, I will open it up for questions. I kind of was speed racer through this, but if we're more than happy to answer questions that you may have.
Excellent. Questions from the committee? There we go, Mr. Hazen.
Mr. Redkoff, really impressive results. Could you just expand a little bit on the keys to success in reducing recidivism? Clearly that has a very significant budget impact for our county when you're able to keep people out of the public safety system, as well as just making our county safer. How are we comparing to other counties? What are the keys to our success?
That's a tremendous question, and I will let Donovan jump in on that.
Yeah, and I think the keys to our success, one, we follow the research incredibly closely. We know what works. We know evidence-based practices, and it's really just our due diligence to incorporate those practices that we know to be effective. It starts with assessment. It really lends to good case planning, being very strategic in what we target with the clients we supervise. And not only that, but it really is a credit to the services that we've developed in our Lane County system, and the quality of dosage, the quality of services that our clients receive. All of that really lends itself to reducing risk. And, we're very diligent and tracking, and I know I've got to say it at least once in this budget presentation, dosage duration and intensity. Those are things that we really focus on and really aim to strive for in working with our client population. So it really is no secret recipe. It's just evidence-based practices that are applied and being, sound to the models that we develop.
Well, and by dosage, you mean face-to-face contact, active engagement by an officer working with the client very purposefully on the issues specific to the client, be they housing, employment, family structure, family well-being, but it's truly is that personalized, deep involvement that really has been a challenge trying to do that remotely for this past year.
And I would certainly identify that as a cognitive behavioral intervention aimed at a top criminogenic risk factor. So to get really scientific with it, but yes,
getting all the words in.
I agree that yes, face-to-face is our telework has been a poor substitute for the face-to-face work in building that rapport that is so necessary and vital in working with our clients, for sure.
And I have to say, and this is important, and I think Commissioner Bozovich will help me with this. One of the challenges we've had with having Lane County stay in the extreme category for so long is that has shut down Lane County Circuit Court. And with that, this is one of those few models of funding where, we're required to have people processed through and be convicted of a felony for them to qualify. We get a funding model based on that. And the fact that the courts were so limited in their ability to work through people, we've seen our numbers of new felons drop, yet we've seen with the release of folks coming out with early release, we're having greater business need than we've had before. But because the pipeline, our funding gets measured at the front end of the pipeline, we're harmed by that. And with this one-legged stool of funding, depending really on felony convictions, we have some hard days ahead of us.
Other questions from the committee?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Yes, Mr. Chair, the second half of my question was about comparison to other counties.
Use the 416, Donovan. Talk about the fact that was tried in other counties and they did not see the same results.
That's accurate. Yeah. In fact, we were in a randomized control trial with the 416 project, and it had significant improvements here in Lane County than it did in Marion. In Marion, they actually saw business as usual model produce far better than the 416. And in our county, the 416, hands down, based on our business as usual, just yielded incredible results. So I think, as I mentioned, we saw almost a 90% reduction in new crimes and 45% in revocation, which means prison. So that's huge. So yeah, I would say that we definitely hit it out of the park on the 416, and we experienced benefits that really our comparator county in that just didn't receive.
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I understand all the factors that went into the decision to close the RRC. And I'm wondering about the RLAN program being embedded in that historically, and for funding, what it's going to take to preserve at least that component, because I know how successful and important and impactful it is. And I meant to ask the sheriff if that's if that's in his budget in the reentry line item and treatment and transition. I don't know where to find that or what we need to do to ensure that at least that component of that work gets preserved.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. We've certainly, and this has been, as you so eloquently stated, that has been a very successful program in our county. It has actually given way to increased opportunity to address risk and need, to just get the results that we need. And I think the model is, rather than using the RRC, and it's, and it was always developed based on kind of a step up model. So from the Community Corrections Center, the goal really successfully 60 days was to graduate to the sponsors facility, which is not a given for everybody. And so that was really our carrot. And so now we're looking at pivoting on the model a bit and really bringing people directly to sponsors and having that be kind of the incubator to start the healthy change process for folks. And so at this point, just with the closing of the CCC, we're in a position where we've had to pivot on that, but we have seen the success, and it's something that we can't ignore, and I hope that we're going to be able to continue it.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Jay, go ahead, please.
So I just real quickly want to point out that a lot of our success with recidivism is because of how intertwined our entire public safety system is. Yes. It's really great that parole and probation is following Health and Human Services, because a lot of the stuff they're doing is services that are provided to our parolees and folks on probation. So just be aware that this is all so interconnected. And I do want to mention, just so folks understand, 416 stands for a program that's a downward departure, which is where people basically put off a felony charge to go through a treatment program. If they successfully complete the treatment program, the felony charge is dropped. So that's what that number stands for. It was based on what there was a federal 416 program that gave us a grant to start it originally. We continued it with a lot of JRI and general fund support. And when you start comparing us between other counties, I do want to mention that the Marion County RCT results were partly based on Marion County has a higher level of their base of what they were comparing to. Somewhat. So I just want to don't knock Marion down too far. Paul Solomon would be the first to mention that. And also, as we look at comparing us with other counties, Multnomah County puts in almost $2 for every $1 of community corrections fund from their general fund into their parole and probation department. I mean, incredible support where we barely support our parole and probation with general fund dollars because we just don't have them. So there's a large level of difference between counties and service level for parole and probation. And like Donovan was noting, we have such a huge amount of high-risk parolees and caseload compared to the number of officers. And that's partly because we really have an understaffed parole and probation department. So I just want to try and put some of that stuff out there as we're talking about that, because I know that you might have gotten the idea that all sunshine, and it's not really. And they're doing amazing work with very limited resources of actual personnel in PNP. And part of that's because they've got such great support from other sources, everything from our Human Services Commission funding that supports a lot of services that these people access, to our mental health folks, to the treatment side, and things like our electronic surveillance program, through the sheriff's office. It's all tied together. and forms this huge public safety system. So it's kind of fun to watch it all be presented today, but you kind of don't quite get how knitted together the whole thing is.
And thanks for the clarification. You know, as a former Marion County employee, I would never poke at them unless it was in fun, and it really was not apples to apples. We were in two very different places at Marion and laying through that study. So thank you for pointing that out.
Great. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Well, thank you, Donovan. Thank you, Greg.
No, thank you. And hopefully you guys can get some rest. I appreciate you giving us the extra time.
We do apologize for being late. We're glad that you stuck in there with us and could finish that up. So
absolutely. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Okay, committee. Let's see here. We've got committee business. Does anybody here from the committee have anything else to bring up at this point in time? Okay. Ms. Moody, anything from budget staff?
Nothing specific. I'll just mention tomorrow's meeting starts at 2 p.m. again. And you do have the agenda, so you can see the departments if you want to look at their sections of the document ahead of time.
Great. Thank you, Christine. That's it. Meeting's adjourned. See you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Thank you.